Coming in at number 5, we have the expressionless. According to this very bizarre legend, a nameless woman arrived at the Cedars-Sinai Hospital back in June of 1972 wearing a bloodied white gown. Now, what set this woman apart from the rest of the patients in the hospital was that she had a mannequin-like appearance, yet moved fluently like any normal person. Her face was devoid of facial features, and on top of all of that, the woman had a kitten inside of her mouth, which she pulled out before collapsing to the ground. Now, she was quickly rushed into a room and prepped for sedation, with the staff opting to restrain her just in case. However, when they attempted to inject her, the woman immediately fought back. She then rose from the bed and revealed razor-sharp teeth that were seemingly impossible to fit into her mouth. She then attacked one of the doctors, sinking her teeth firmly into his neck, killing him quickly. When authorities arrived, they couldn't restrain her, with the woman killing everyone in the hospital, with only one nurse surviving the onslaught, dubbing the woman the expressionless. Since that day, there has never been a sighting of her, perhaps because she isn't real. What I don't understand is why she had a kitten in her mouth. That is the most bizarre part of the entire thing. Now, the origin behind this legend, it was uploaded on the internet, appearing on Creepypasta back in June of 2012. Coming in at number 4, we have Lavender Town Syndrome. This is a popular urban legend amongst gamers, specifically those who played Pokemon Red and Green in Japan. This legend began back in 1996 when there was an apparent peak in suicides and sickness in folks between the ages of 7 to 12 years old. Rumors began to spread that illness occurred in children who reached Lavender Town in Pokemon, with it being said that the town's theme music had extremely high-pitched frequencies that may have resulted in folks becoming sick or even taking their own lives. Due to this frequency, it is said that around 200 people took their own lives or developed illnesses and afflictions, with some complaining of severe headaches after listening to the music. The mass hysteria ultimately resulted in the programmers fixing the music to be at a lower frequency, and since then no complaints have been made. In Pokemon Gold, Silver and Crystal, the Lavender Town music was recomposed altogether to be happier, and the Pokemon Tower was demolished and replaced with the Kanto Radio Tower. The Lavender Town theme was also re-recorded for the 2017 Pokemon Go Halloween event. In at number 3, we have the disappearance of Ashley, Kansas. Now, this is a bizarre urban legend, but one of my favorites on this entire list. It is said that back in 1952, an anomalous incident occurred in the town of Ashley, Kansas. However, it should be noted that this isn't, nor has ever been, a real place. Sorry to burst your bubble. However, the legend states that back in 1952, an earthquake occurred in the middle of the night, resulting in strange happenings. Specifically, the town of Ashley, Kansas abruptly disappearing. When police went to investigate, they found nothing, only a smoldering burning fissure. It was said that the 679 residents of the town were missing. However, the search for them was called off after 12 days of searching. The legend also goes on to state that not long after, yet another earthquake occurred, and this time when the police went to investigate, the burning fissure was gone and the town was still nowhere to be seen. And that is all that is known about Ashley, Kansas, the town that supposedly disappeared overnight. Coming in at number 2, we have Slenderman. To quote the original Slenderman post on Something Awful, "We didn't want to go, we didn't want to kill them, but its persistent silence and outstretched arms horrified and comforted us at the same time." This is perhaps the most popular modern day legend on our list, with it crossing over into the mainstream with games and movies being made about this supernatural figure. Now, Slenderman originated as a creepypasta internet meme created by Something Awful forums user Eric Knudsen back in 2009. Slender is described as being incredibly tall, somewhere between 7 to 9 feet, as well as pale in complexion with an emaciated figure. He is sometimes portrayed with incomplete features such as empty eye sockets. He is also said to possess a handful of supernatural powers and abilities. He is said to be immortal, having lived for around 11,000 years without end, and any wounds inflicted on him instantly heal. Now, stories told about the supernatural character commonly feature him stalking, abducting, or traumatizing children. Now, outside of the internet, he has become an icon, with a prominent influence in popular culture, with video games being made about the figure, including Slender the 8 Pages and Slender the Arrival. However, things became very real with this legend back in 2014 when 2 girls attacked another girl and claimed to the courts that they did it for Slenderman, which is absolutely terrifying. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have the Russian sleep experiment. This urban legend emerged a few years back in 2010, so sorry to disappoint in advance, but this one is certainly not real, but that doesn't stop folks from speculating. Now, the legend itself recounts a supposed experiment that took place in the late 1940s in a Soviet test facility. According to the legend, 5 prisoners were kept in a sealed gas chamber with a continually administered airborne stimulant, which kept them awake for 30 consecutive days. Now, the prisoners volunteered for the experiment under the false promise that they would be released after the 30 days. For the first few days of the experiment, the prisoners behaved normally, chatting with one another and even talking to researchers through the one-way glass. However, over the subsequent days, things quickly turned much darker. After 9 days, one of the prisoners began screaming uncontrollably for hours on end, while the other prisoners seemingly had no reaction to the odd outburst. The man ultimately screamed for so long that his vocal cords burst, which makes me feel physically sick. I know this isn't real, but the idea of that happening is disgusting. Not long after, a second prisoner began screaming, while the others prevented the researchers from looking in by pasting torn book pages to the windows with their own feces. A few more days passed and things went silent, and after 15 days, the researchers decided to turn off the stimulant and enter the room. What they found was absolutely disgusting. One of the prisoners was deceased, and the 4 remaining survivors had performed severe mutilation on themselves, tearing off their own flesh and removing their own organs. In at number 5, we have Space Mountain. There are a surprising amount of urban legends surrounding this ride at Disney World, which is odd. It is just a ride after all, right? Nothing strange about it. According to legend, one rider was decapitated while on Space Mountain because he supposedly stood up while riding. What an idiot. Now, this is only a little bit true. There was a decapitation, but it was on a test dummy, not a real person. No person has ever been killed while riding Space Mountain. However, there is another dark legend that surrounds this ride. According to legend, on Space Mountain you can find Mr. One-Way. Some accounts describe Mr. One-Way as a red-haired man with a red face, with stories stating that he hangs out in the line for Space Mountain. But this differs depending on who you ask. According to video footage, Mr. One-Way will sometimes get onto the ride with other passengers, grabbing an available seat. However, it is said that he disappears right before you reach the final tunnel at the end of the ride. On top of that, there is supposedly a second ghost called Disco Debbie, who is also said to haunt Space Mountain, and according to some riders, she glows in the dark. Very freaky indeed. Coming in at number 4, we have Magnolia Creek Lake. Magnolia was once a thriving riverport town in southern Wakulla County, Florida, which was established all the way back in the 1820s and is now classified as an extinct city by the State Library and Archives of Florida. All that remains of the city is a cemetery, with the last known burial being back in 1859. Magnolia Creek Lane is a narrow road fit for one car at a time south of Montverde on the west side of Lake Ogopogo. According to legend, the road and surrounding lake is haunted by around 200 passengers who were killed in a train wreck. However, many have attempted to find evidence of this, but none has ever been found, yet the legend continues. Now, while the road appears to be built on an old train track, the only documented railroad runs slightly north of the location. Now, this road is supposedly where all kinds of horrible things happened back in the 1890s, and according to some locals, at the creek that runs to Lake Ogopogo, you can hear the loud screams in the woods. However, when you get closer, they move farther away. The screams are said to be that of the train crew that died. However, skeptics believe this is actually sound that is being reflected from another place. According to a local, Michelle, she said, I quote, "My cousin went to Montverde Academy and heard about this road that runs off 455 that used to be a railroad bed. And they say that if you go down there at night, you can hear ghostly sounds and see eerie shadows of people walking on the road. I don't know for sure about this because I never went there, so it is just what I heard." Coming in at number 3, I-4 Dead Zone. Interstate 4 is a highway in Florida that spans 132 miles, with it running from Tampa all the way to Daytona Beach. Now, the interstate is frequented daily by folks heading to work and those on their way to Disney World. Now, while it is a popular highway, it is also another nickname for it, the Dead Zone, an area where folks need to be particularly careful. This area of the highway has been the location of many accidents, electronic malfunctions, as well as supposed ghost sightings. So why exactly is this spot so dangerous and filled with so much paranormal paranormal activity? Well, this is because this quarter mile of highway was built over a gravesite, and as we know from movies, a disturbed gravesite means bad news bears. It means you're in for a nasty surprise. It means you're gonna die. Don't believe it? Well, oddly enough, on the very first day the new interstate was opened, a tractor trailer carrying frozen goods lost control and crashed directly above the disturbed graves of people who had died from yellow fever. It is believed that around 1,500 to 2,000 accidents have occurred on the highway since 1963, which is a lot. And worse still, many of those accidents resulted in death, and between a 24-month period, there were around 44 car accidents, resulting in approximately 65 people being injured. Some locals fear this area of the highway so much that they actually take a much longer route around it. On top of all of this, back in the 1950s, a young boy was said to have disturbed the graves, and the following night he was killed by a drunk driver. And to add insult to injury, the driver was never caught. Coming in at number 2, we have the Devil's Chair, also known as the Haunted Chair. This is an urban legend hailing from folklore that is attached to a class of funerary or memorial sculpture common throughout the United States during the 19th century. Now, these chairs were known as the mourning chairs for visitors to cemeteries to sit on when visiting loved ones. However, since then cemeteries have provided benches for similar purposes. Once the original purpose of these chairs fell out of fashion, superstition quickly developed in association with sitting in the chair. For example, some young people dare one another to visit the site, most often after dark or at midnight, or in some cases on Halloween. Stories state that if you sit in the chair at these specific times, something awful will happen, with people fearing that they will be punished. In Florida specifically, the Devil's Chair is located in Cassadaga, Florida, and is a graveside bench in the cemetery that borders Cassadaga as well as Lake Helen. According to legend, an unopened can of beer left on the chair will be empty by morning. Now, in some stories the can has already been opened, and in others the liquid is simply gone through the unopened top. On top of that, it is said that the devil will sometimes appear to anyone bold enough to sit in the chair itself. So if you do decide to visit the chair at night and take a seat expecting to meet the devil, just be sure to have a beer in hand ready for him, because it is said that he will be expecting one. As am I, all the time. I would like a beer. Maybe that's why I'm evil. I'm the devil. And finally, coming in at number 1, Legend of the Skunk Ape. Also known as the Swamp Cabbage Man, Swamp Ape, Stink Ape, Florida Bigfoot, and Louisiana Bigfoot, this is a creature that is said to inhabit Florida and is named for its appearance and for its unpleasant odor that is said to accompany it. The ape has supposedly been a part of Florida folklore since the settler period, which is absolutely insane. One of the first reports of the skunk ape in Florida came from the year 1818, when a report spoke of a man-sized monkey or ape raiding stores and stalking fishermen. This became particularly common in the 60s and 70s, with one sighting occurring in 1974 which spoke of a large foul-smelling hairy ape-like creature which was said to run upright on 2 legs in the neighborhood of Dade County, Florida. However, some people were skeptical, including investigator Joe Nickel, who stated that these reports may represent a black bear and that other sightings may in fact be hoaxes or misidentification of wildlife. In terms of appearance, the creature is said to resemble the Sasquatch of the Pacific Northwest. However, the skunk ape is said to be shorter in comparison. It has long patches of fur on the shoulders and arm and is often described as a mottled rusty red colour as opposed to the Sasquatch's brown and black coat.
Coming in at number 5, we've got the Peace Picture. I love this story. Honestly, I had no idea that it came from Korea either. When I worked as a camp counselor, I would tell this on night hikes all the time, and let me tell you, it really scared some campers. There are a few different versions with different main characters and different setup scenarios, but the meat and potatoes all pretty much stay the same. Alright, so the legend goes a little something like this. A middle schooler is biking home with his friends and they come to a forest path. Our main character lives through the woods and his pals take a different route home. So the group splits up and the young lad cycles through the trees. As he's going along, something catches his eye. There's a Polaroid picture lying face down at the foot of a tree. He pulls off the path, hops off his bike, and notices that there's a broken bicycle behind the tree. Picking up the photo, he sees a cute girl smiling at the camera, flashing the peace sign. You know the one. He really likes the picture, so he pockets it and heads home. That night, the boy feels an overwhelming urge to look out the window. When he does, he notices a young girl standing in his yard, facing away from him. He calls out to her, but she doesn't react. Feeling strange, he heads downstairs and walks into the yard, but the girl is nowhere to be seen. The next day, he shows his friends the picture and tells them the story of the girl in his yard, but none of them seem to recognize her. They go about their day at school, and then it's time to go home. On the ride home, the boy keeps an eye out for the girl about town, but doesn't see anyone resembling her. He and his friends make it to the woods again and split up. Distracted, the boy pedals his way through the flora and fauna. Suddenly, he catches a glimpse of someone behind a tree and cranes his neck to see if it could be her. Unfortunately, this causes him to lose his focus and crash. He doesn't survive. Weeks later, another kid is wandering through the woods. They see a Polaroid photograph lying in the decomposing leaves. Picking the picture up, they see a really cute girl holding up 3 fingers. Thinking it's a nice photo, they pocket it and head right along. Creepy, right? There are many variants, with car wrecks instead of bike crashes and grown men instead of school children, but the peace sign evolving into a 3 with another victim stays the same. Coming in at number 4, we've got virgin ghosts. It's every frat boy from the 80s worst nightmare, dying a virgin. Apparently this fear crosses cultures too. Known in Korea as the Chonyo-gwishin, they can be found all over the place. Folks say that you might run into a virgin ghost in abandoned buildings, hospitals, schools, bathrooms, cemeteries, and forests. So basically, anywhere you might have found a living virgin. They're characterized by their long dark hair that completely covers their face, and they're always wearing white clothing. Look behind that hair and you'll notice they look pretty bummed too. I suppose that comes with the title, huh? People say you'll know you're near one when the temperature drops suddenly and the wind changes direction. Chills are a common symptom too, but those kinda come with the previous 2. In Confucian Korean culture, it was a woman's role to serve her father, husband, and sons. If someone died before doing these things, she would be cursed to wander the earth forever. So if a woman was to die a virgin, she would become a Chonyo-gwishin. This comes with a fair deal of bitterness. Often, these ghosts will wander around the place where their former family lived, doing their best to cause problems for their good old relatives. Apparently erecting, pardon the pun, phallic statues could calm an angry virgin ghost down. This doesn't work, or if town council won't approve a long hard statue, you can always try to introduce the ghost to an equally single male. The male virgin ghost, or the Chonggak-gwishin, is always looking for someone to marry to put their soul to rest. So if you find one virgin ghost, you'd best get to work finding another. Coming in at number 3, we've got dreaming of dead family. You would think that seeing a dead family member might be nice. You know, maybe they're here to give you some advice or warn you of impending danger. Or maybe they're just showing up because they miss you. Aww. However, there's a South Korean urban legend that says dreaming of a dead loved one is bad news. Do your best to resist their lovely charm, alright? It's said that if you dream of a dead family member or friend, they're going to try and steal your soul. They'll call you towards them, and if you head on down and give them a hug, it's game over. This is especially common near water, apparently. If these dreams persist, it's best to look into why they're happening. It's likely that whoever's calling out to you thinks that you owe them something, or you're holding on to one of their belongings. To figure out for sure, people advise heading out to wherever they're buried to pay respects. That should take care of the potentially soul-stealing dreams, and if not, well, I don't know what to tell you. Keep avoiding hugs, I guess. Coming in at number 2, we've got dog-human hybrids. Stories of people hearing disembodied voices while walking alone have been around pretty much forever, but this particular legend explains the mysterious phenomenon in a pretty creepy way. Around the 1970s, all sorts of folks started telling tall tales of finding truly disturbing creatures late at night. While strolling along, they hear a voice. They look up, they look down, they look left, they look right, and nobody's around, so they resume walking, but the voice calls out again. It's talking to them. A little paranoid now, the person checks behind them and looks to see if anyone is leaning out of a window or something. No dice. Then a little dog runs up to them. Oh, what a cute little dog, they think. But then it speaks, using language. And the person gets a good look at the 4-legged creature, and oh god, it's got a human face. Anyone with unsoiled trousers at that point is a champion. These chimeric abominations are apparently quite common in Japanese and Korean folklore. It's said that someone who lives a sinful life will end up reincarnated as a half-dog, half-human monstrosity. Like, it would be cool to live the carefree life of a dog, but definitely not with a human head and intelligence. But considering my sinful modern lifestyle, I'm destined to become a dog man. What's a good name for one of those? And finally, at number 1, we've got sesame seeds. I know what you're thinking. Keegan, you must be losing it. Sesame seeds aren't an urban legend. They're an edible plant byproduct, delicious on bagels and breads. But you see, I know sesame seeds are real. But there are plenty of legends concerning them in Korea. Remember when I warned all the trypophobes to skedaddle? Well, this is why. There are a few different stories about the ill effects of sesame seeds. One concerns a young woman taking a rejuvenating sesame seed bath. She learns of a lovely new skin treatment where you pour sesame seeds into your bath water. Supposedly this does wonders, leaving you extra youthful and glowing with super clean pores. So the woman decides to give it a try. She fills the tub, tosses in the seeds, and steps into the bath. Her mother, knowing how excited her daughter was to try this treatment, begins to worry after she doesn't come out of the bathroom for an hour. She knocks on the door but gets no answer. Fearing the worst, the mother forces the door open and stumbles in. Her daughter's unconscious in the tub with sesame seeds stuck on all of her grotesquely open pores. The seeds have taken root in her skin. Oh, yuck. The alternate telling of this tale involves sesame seed skin cream with similar terrifying results. I suppose the pimple-popping crowd might find this fascinating, but for most folks, this is hideously upsetting. Usually the victim in this sesame seed disaster is able to have all the seeds removed, but it is a time-consuming and painful process. However, leave the seeds too long and you might end up as a human planter. Imagine the roots growing deeper and deeper into your flesh. It's kind of like that watermelon seed urban legend where if you swallow a seed, you'll grow one of the bulbous fruits in your stomach.
Number 5. Slenderman. One of the more recent and yet prevalent urban legends is that of Marble Hornets' elongated Slenderman. The enigmatic figure is depicted as a tall, gangly, thin entity dressed in a suit and tie with fractally ever-expanding limbs and a blank, featureless humanoid head. Slenderman first reared that featureless head in internet forums and creepypasta stories, but gained incredible popularity and took a life beyond the internet. The legend of Slenderman states that it lurks in the shadows, often in backwoods and rural areas, and preys upon unsuspecting people. He's said to have an array of supernatural abilities, manipulating people's minds, controlling their actions subconsciously, can teleport, appear, and disappear at will. Slenderman is synonymous with strange disappearances, leaving behind trails of unsettling clues. Slenderman is a genuine phenomenon, transcending the digital realm and seeping into our real-life consciousness and absorbing up our thoughts. I think it's fascinating that in real time we got to watch this thing that started as an internet project turn into a genuine urban legend that will probably be told and retold for future generations. I feel like that's incredible. You see Slenderman in movies, you've seen Slenderman in tons of video games, you've probably seen all kinds of fan art, cosplay, little merchandise. Slenderman has a fandom rivaling most influencers, and is probably one of the most popular cryptids in the world, and also one of the most infamous. Because there is a very dark turn to Slenderman, when in 2014, 2 girls in Wisconsin carried out an attack on their classmate to please the entity, saying that they had been influenced by him, blending the lines between fiction and reality a bit too uncomfortably for most people's takes. A stark reminder to not take anything you hear on the internet too seriously. And if you're looking for way more scary stories of cryptids and urban legends, well, you don't need to go anywhere else on YouTube because you're in the perfect place for it. We've got a video or two on just about anything freaky you can think of. Hit that subscribe button, click that little bell so you don't miss a scream, but would you kindly do that at the end of this video? Because I got 4 more urban legends I am just itching to tell you all about. Number 4, the Gray Man. Coming up next on our list, we're going to take a quick trip to Europe as we head up to Scotland as we talk about the Gray Man. Up in the mist-shrouded peaks of the Cairngorms, they say there's a spirit out there called the Gray Man, watching over the harsh and treacherous terrain. This spectral entity lurks amidst the craggy slopes and swirling mists, described as a towering figure with an indistinct form. His appearance is shrouded in gray mist that seems to blend with the surrounding landscape, his eyes gleaming with an otherworldly glow, looking just a bit like my black cat walking in the darkness getting caught by a flashlight. Some say the Gray Man is made up of the mist itself, precipitation given form in the shape of a being mistaken as a man. Many mountaineers and hikers who've braved the slopes of Ben Macdui have reported scary happenings that could be proof of the Gray Man's presence there. Eerily echoing footsteps, an overwhelming sense of dread taking over the pit of your stomach, and some bold expeditioners even claim that they've seen a glimpse of a towering gray humanoid silhouette watching them as they walk over the mountain. The legends warn you that those who are unfortunate enough to cross paths with the Gray Man will bring unimaginable malfeasance to you and your kin. Should you encounter him, you become disoriented, losing your way to the treacherous slopes or being driven to unspeakable madness from the supernatural powers that he has. Above all else though, what is the Gray Man? Where did the legend come from? Is it a malevolent spirit haunting those who cross into its territory? A guardian protecting the mountains? Whatever it might be, just be cautious walking through Ben McDewey. And if we have any Scottish viewers who have a bit of insight into the Gray Man, I found this legend absolutely fascinating and I would love any information you could share with us. Number 3, Mokele-mbembe. Up next on our strange list of urban legends from across the world is going to be that of the cryptid Mokele-mbembe. A cryptid that was totally new to me until this video, so I hope you are finding out about it too at the same time. There are very few things that make me half as happy as finding out about a new cryptid or a new urban legend that I haven't heard about before, because I read a lot of scary stuff every single day. The Mokele-mbembe is a creature that is said to inhabit the remote regions of the Congo and is said to resemble a large, semi-aquatic creature sort of looking like a sauropod dinosaur. That's long neck if you're a Land Before Time fan. One of the really long ones. You probably heard it called as a brontosaurus. It's actually an apatosaurus, not to be too paleontology nerdy on the channel, but you know, it's important to get that out there. It looks like any other number of long-necked sauropods is what I'm trying to get across. Looks like a big dinosaur. Luckily, the creature is believed to be herbivorous, feeding on plants and aquatic vegetation. Now, according to local legends, the Mokele-mbembe is said to inhabit the vast network of rivers, swamps, and dense forests of the Congo. Now, this thing's said to be secretive. Like most cryptids out there, there's very few camera-friendly cryptids, and it rarely reveals itself to humans. However, unlike many stories of cryptids or urban legends on this list or not, the Mokele-mbembe is not hostile. It's not eating people, it's not attacking people. If you find yourself encountering the Mokele-mbembe, it's said that you are blessed with good luck and spiritual protection. I mean, obviously, you get to meet a dinosaur. That's like the coolest thing ever. Now, in the past, there have been official expeditions hunting for the creature, but it's hard to nail down due to the dense and inhospitable nature of the Congo. Now, much like Top 5 Scary's favorite, the Megalodon, or the Loch Ness Monster, the Mokele-mbembe is said to be a long since extinct creature that somehow persisted onwards, or a new species that's eluded classification by science. So what is it? Is it really out there? I hope I can see it someday and be blessed with a bit of spiritual protection from my favorite long neck. Number 2, Akamanto. Up next at our number 2 spot, and it's a very fitting spot at number 2, and you'll see why in a minute, is Akamanto, also known as the Red Cloak. It manifests as a masked Japanese spirit and may very well be one of the most evil and downright strange creatures of folklore and urban myth you will ever hear about, I promise. The creature is a humanoid spirit with a long, flowing red cloak that traditionally has a mask that covers its features. It carries a blade or sometimes a scythe of some kind. Now, there's tons of little local variants in how the Akamanto operates, but there are elements that remain consistent across all tales. First and foremost, the Akamanto's modus operandus. The Akamanto preys on you during your most vulnerable moments. This would-be spiritual assassin comes to slay kings on the porcelain throne. It knocks on the smallest room in the house. This demon comes for you while you're on the toilet, if I can be so blue for a moment. That's why it's the number 2 spot. There you go. Little 3rd grade humor for you. Speaking of blue, that leads into the deadly game you're forced to play. The Akamanto then offers you a sinister choice. It asks the occupant a question, choosing between either red toilet paper or blue toilet paper. It's kind of like that guy from Squid Games offering you the paper. Actually, this is a little fun Top 5 Scary trivia for you. This cryptid is actually what literally inspired that scene in Squid Game. Now, it's a trick question. Neither of these toilet papers that this ghastly spirit has for you are anything like the Royale kittens, okay? The red paper means you will find yourself cut up, leaving behind quite a mess of red. The blue option means you'll be gasping for air, which is clean but slow and painful. This is so funny, but the only way to escape the Akamanto is to tell him that you've got enough toilet paper yourself. And thanks for asking, but you're good. Really, you just have to ignore him, reject his offer, or flush quick and hightail it out of there. You don't play smart with him, you don't ask for purple paper or sandpaper or any wise guy answers, as that's said to lead to the Akamanto dragging you into the underworld, just as long as he doesn't flush you. That's amazing. I love so much that this cryptid, you don't have to do any complicated ritual. You don't have to have some special weapon to fight him. You just have to tell him, no thanks. That's good advice. And number 1, La Llorona. Now, last time you guys made fun of my pronunciation for this, and I would like to inform you that I'm trying to do it better, but I'm almost certainly still doing it wrong. La Llorona, also known as the Weeping Woman, is a haunting legend deeply rooted in Latin American folklore. Perhaps you've heard her story before, on this channel even. She's rather infamous, told and retold, appearing in countless campfire stories, TV, movies. Her tale has captivated generations, scaring us and fascinating us. It's a cautionary tale, warning us of the consequences of disobedience and the dangers of the night. According to the legends, La Llorona was a beautiful woman named Maria who lived in a rural village. She fell in love with a wealthy nobleman and had a family with him. However, the nobleman abandoned her for a younger woman, shattering Maria's heart. Oh, Maria, baby. Nobleman will do that to you. Consumed by grief and anger, Maria drowned her family, except for her husband, in a fit of madness, realizing too late the enormity of her actions. Overwhelmed by guilt and remorse for what she had done, she cast herself into the water and took her own life. But her spirit was denied afterlife, and she was condemned to wander the earth for eternity. She's often described as a spectral figure dressed all in white, her face obscured by either a veil of sorrow or her long, black, wet-soaked hair covering over it. She's said to haunt rivers, lakes, other bodies of water, weeping inconsolably as she searches for her lost family she'll never find. Her cries are bone-chilling, a mournful wail that echoes through the night, and whatever you do, if you hear it, you need to ignore it. You need to avoid it. Do not go bothering her. Legend has it that encountering her is basically a guarantee of misfortune. It's said that she looks out for younger people, mistakes them for her own, and drags them away. Many claim to have seen her and heard her cries in the darkness, but if they try to approach, she vanishes.
Coming in at number 5, we've got Ogopogo. Let's start with a famous one. Move over, Nessie. We've got a Canadian sea cryptid to discuss. If you've ever been to British Columbia, you'll know that there are plenty of mountains and lakes to explore. One of the more well-known ones, both for its picturesque qualities and supposed housing of a monster, is Lake Okanagan. Situated in Kelowna, this lake is famous for its vacation-friendly beaches. But if you head out looking for a relaxing day on the water, you might meet up with a strange beast. Sightings of the Ogopogo date back to 1972, but indigenous legends have been telling tales of the creature for much longer. It's described as a long, slender creature with many humps and a horse head that peeks out of the lake during thunderstorms. Sound familiar? While not nearly as famous, Ogopogo is quite similar to Nessie when you get down to it. Both are aquatic, hard to find, and attract all sorts of cryptid hunters. All sorts of folks have claimed to see Ogopogo swimming around, popping its head out of the water from time to time. Photos and videos are common, but none are really verifiable or convincing. Thankfully, the creature seems to be relatively friendly. For all these sightings and rumors, there haven't been too many claims of violence or aggression from the lake-dwelling beast. In fact, it's actually quite well liked by everyone. In the 90s, the Canadian government commissioned a postage stamp in honor of Ogopogo. Way to go. Skeptics all have their explanations for what it might actually be, with one prevalent idea claiming that it's actually a primitive whale that only comes out during calmer seasons. Regardless of whether it's real or not, what's more fun to say in the end, Nessie or Ogopogo? I'll let you guys decide. Coming in at number 4, we've got the University of Toronto Phantom Worker. If a film is being shot in Toronto, you're more than likely going to catch a glimpse of U of T's campus. The school's buildings are ornate and beautiful, perfect for giving a scholarly feel to any scene. A lot of the buildings have facades that date back to the early 19th century, giving them a timeless feel. Of course, with any buildings that have been around so long, there will be ghost stories. Back in the 1920s, U of T built a Gothic memorial to honor students who had died during the First World War. During construction of this elaborate memorial, many workers were hired to help out. Legend says that one of the workers fell from the tower while polishing the bells, a true Hunchback of Notre Dame moment. Ever since that fateful incident, students and faculty alike have claimed to see the ghost of the worker wandering around campus. Some even claim that there have been ghostly apparitions falling from the tower. Folks who don't know the legend will run to see if the poor fellow is okay, but never find a body. So much for being a good Samaritan. There are many other ghost stories surrounding the university as well, but none so stomach-dropping. Stonemasons with murderous qualities, little girls lost in planetariums, and a baker who managed to trap his mistress inside a secret room. The stories are real, but are the ghosts still haunting the campus? I suppose you'll have to pay the institution a visit and find out. Just try not to get roped into paying tuition, alright? That's scarier than any ghost story. Coming in at number 3, we've got the Nennorluk. We've talked about urban legends from the far west coast and the most populous city, so now let's take a trip out east. Known for its quaint, peaceful charm, Newfoundland is the last place you'd expect to find terrifying urban legends, right? I mean, you can get screeched in and end up with a scary hangover and only a faint memory of your previous night, but that's something else entirely. The monster seen near Newfoundland dwells in the sea, but does so unconventionally. How do you think sea monsters usually get around? By swimming, right? Well, this thing acts a little differently than most. First sighted by Sir Humphrey Gilbert back in the 16th century, it was described as a lion-like creature. This fits the description of an Inuit cryptid known as the Nennorluk. Legends of such a creature have been passed down through generations of people, but it was considered just a legend to outsiders until Sir Humphrey Gilbert came across it himself. The Nennorluk is a gigantic beast estimated to be as tall as an iceberg. It's got white fur, huge ears, and loves to eat anything that gets close enough. Seals are the classic meal, but it won't turn down a human if they get close. Now, back to that bit about movement. The Nennorluk doesn't swim, it walks along the bottom of the ocean. Yep, not the most efficient way to get around, but it gets the job done. Imagine watching a gigantic beast just walk out of the sea towards you. This is also the reason why people say that it's not really ever seen away from shore. It makes sense considering how deep the ocean is. But if you ever spot a little antenna poking out of the water, it's time to get a move on. And if you ever hear a deafening roar, it's probably too late. Coming in at number 2, we've got the Cabbagetown Tunnel Monster. We'll return to Toronto for a moment, you know, because of the urban qualities of these legends. Get it? Well, every tunnel system has its fair share of legends, and the Cabbagetown Tunnel is no exception. I'm surprised nobody's gone back and tried to get footage of this strange creature. Back in the 70s, a kitten ran away from home. While searching for his lost feline, a man came across a tunnel in Cabbagetown. Thinking that the kitten might have run in here to hide, he descended down into the abyss. Scanning the darkness for any sign of the little animal, he noticed some motion off to the side. Thinking it might be what he was looking for, the man pointed his flashlight at the movement and saw something he was definitely not expecting, neither cute nor cuddly. He claims to have seen a monkey-like creature with glowing orange eyes standing at half the height of a man covered in gray fur. If that horrible sight wasn't enough, listen to this. The man froze up and kept his light trained on the monster. The monster didn't like this much and told the man in an awful, trembling voice, "Go away. Go away." And guess what the man did next? He hightailed it out of there and didn't look back. This story made its way around for a while, but nobody ever properly looked into it. That is, until a year later. The man's friend had convinced him to share his story, so he went to the Toronto Sun with the scoop. A reporter accompanied him back to the tunnel, and they both scoured the inside. Looking around, they didn't find any evidence of a monster, but they did discover the remains of a cat. Some speculate that the tunnel leads to a point in the Toronto sewer system, and others have different ideas. Either way, nobody has seen the Cabbagetown sewer monster since. Would you go looking? Finally, at number 1, we've got the ghost ship of Northumberland Strait. Heading back east for a moment, let's consider the Northumberland Strait. This is a body of water that separates Prince Edward Island from Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. It's said that there is a ghost ship that sails upon the strait, more often than not totally engulfed in flame. The legend dates back over 200 years and always seems to play out the same way. Folks on land will look out to see a beautiful schooner with pure white sails. As they look on, these sails will catch fire and the whole ship starts burning. Often people will head out on rescue missions only to find that there was never a ship to begin with. Legend says that the ship will only appear before a northeast wind, predicting a storm. So where does this ghost ship come from, and why does it always come back? Well, some people believe that the ship was captained by a pirate who made a deal with the devil. The ship had been fired upon and was burning fast. He wanted his treasure hidden and protected, so he signed the pact and sealed his fate. Now he and his crew are doomed to sail forever on this perpetually burning ship. Yikes. Now, skeptics will tell you that the ghost ship is simply a mirage, but if that were the case, then how do they explain the flames? How very Canadian, eh? I'm glad my homeland has some legends that can stack up against the big ones from other nations. There are plenty more where that came from too. Any real Canadian remembers reading all sorts of real Canadian ghost story books after scholastic fairs.
In at number 5, we have the Beast of Hackney Marshes. This legend dates back to 1981 when 4 kids were crossing the marshes on a winter's morning. It is said that they happened upon, I quote, a giant, great, growling, hairy thing. Naturally, people began to assume that this was some kind of hideous monster. It remained remained a legend going forward, but wasn't spotted again until 2012 when it was captured on camera. Helen Murray, a university student, was out for a stroll near the dense woodland area when she said she was stopped in her tracks by an unknown animal, which she stated was larger than a person and covered in shaggy black fur. I quote, "I tried to stay calm as I wasn't sure what kind of animal it was or if it was even alive. I had my phone ready to call 999, then the creature moved. Somehow I managed to take a couple of pictures before I ran. I managed to get away but was scared half to death." Now, she didn't contact the police because she feared they wouldn't believe her. However, the story certainly revived memories of the unexplained sighting that occurred in '81. Officers have stated that they believe neither of these sightings were hoaxes, and that 2 bear carcasses had previously been found nearby in the River Lee, and to this day it remains a mystery how they even got there. So, were the bears killed by this creature? Were the bears the creature? We don't have bears in England, so... Stumped. In at number 4, the killer pool in Epping Forest. Epping Forest is a 2,400 hectare area of ancient woodland between Epping in Essex and Forest Gate in Greater London. Over 100 lakes and ponds are found in the forest. However, there is only one that is referred to as the killer or suicide pool. This legend grew rapidly in popularity after Irish author Elliot O'Donnell wrote about it in his book Haunted Britain, stating that there is a pool in Epping Forest that is home to unearthly presences, some miserable and some evil. Now, there is one story about the pool that goes as follows. Around 300 years ago, a couple engaged in a forbidden relationship, meeting secretly at the pond in the forest. However, the girl's father found out about the relationship and in a fit of anger he killed her at the pool. After learning about his girlfriend's death, the lover committed suicide at the very same spot. Following these tragic events, no birds were heard and no animals were ever seen in that area again. The water also became dank, and not dank in a good way, bad dank. On top of that, it is said that people with no inclination went on to commit suicide there, including a woman in 1887 and a young servant, Emma Morgan, who killed herself and her child. Jumping forward to 1959, a competition in a magazine was held to find the exact location of the pool. One writer claimed to know but refused to reveal the details, stating that the place was evil beyond measure. I quote, "The suicide pool is deep in the heart of the forest, far from any road. It is dank, evil and malignant, with an atmosphere unpleasant beyond description. It doubt if the sunshine ever penetrates through the surrounding trees. If it did, it would never lighten the black waters." In at number 3, we have the ghosts of the Grey Lady and Longleat House. Longleat House is an English stately home and the seat of the Marquis of Bath. The house was originally built by Sir John Tyne and was designed mainly by Robert Smithson after Longleat Priory was destroyed by fire in 1567. It took almost 12 years to complete and is often regarded as one of the finest examples of Elizabethan architecture in Britain. Sounds magical, right? Well, it has a dark side, one of deceit and murder. It all began back in 1733, when Lady Louisa married Viscount Weymouth, who owned the Longleat estate. Louisa moved into the home with him, bringing with her a number of her own servants. It was said that she was fond of one of her footmen, who she described as loyal and true. Now, this favoritism wasn't taken well among the other servants, and out of jealousy they told Viscount Weymouth that the footman was having an affair with Louisa, which of course wasn't true. Now, this is where the story gets a little blurry. Some say Weymouth paid someone to push the footman down the stairs, while others say he did it himself. Either way, the footman broke his neck and his body was buried in the cellar. This took a toll on Lady Louisa, who developed pneumonia, which resulted in her death at the young age of 22. According to visitors of Longleat House, you can find a lady dressed in grey creeping along the house's corridors, especially close to the library where the footman died. Coming in at number 2, we have the Beast of Bodmin Moor. The Beast of Bodmin Moor is a phantom cat purported to live in Cornwall, England. The creature is said to be panther-like and black-furred, with it stalking around Bodmin Moor killing livestock. Sightings of the beast were reported back in 1978 after mutilated slain livestock were found in the area. Some people proposed that the beast had escaped from a zoo, and as it was illegal to own one privately, the former owner could not report it to the police. It has been claimed that animal trainer Mary Chipperfield had released 3 pumas into the wild following the closure of her Plymouth Zoo in 1978, and perhaps this is what gave rise to rumours of the beast. Jumping forward to 1995, the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food conducted an official investigation, with there being no verifiable evidence of exotic felines loose in Britain, and that instead the livestock could have been killed by indigenous species. However, less than a week after the government report, a boy was walking by the River Fowey when he discovered a large cat skull, measuring about 4 inches long by 7 inches wide. The skull was lacking its lower jaw, but possessed 3 sharp prominent canines that suggest it may have been a leopard. It was immediately sent to the Natural History History Museum in London for verification, with them determining that it was a genuine skull from a young male leopard. And finally, in at number 1 we have Spring-Heeled Jack. Originating from Victoria-era Britain, Spring-Heeled Jack is a character from urban legend that was first supposedly sighted back in 1837. However, over the years more frequent tales have emerged. His name is said to come from his ability to leap over great distances and heights. Not too shabby. The very first sighting of Spring-Heeled Jack came in October of 1837, when a woman named Mary Stevens was walking to Lavender Hill when a tall coated man leapt from the building into the street. He then grabbed her with his metal claws and kissed her before tearing at her clothes. After her screams were heard, he fled the scene, leaping back into the building he came from. Following the encounter, more accounts occurred, with the most notable being the Alsop case. The Alsop case was one of the most widespread stories about Jack, with it being published in several newspapers. Jane Alsop recalls the moments when she was attacked, stating, "I answered the door of my father's house to a man claiming to be a police officer, who told me to bring a light, claiming, 'We have caught Spring-Heeled Jack here in the lane.' I brought the person a candle and noticed that he wore a large cloak. The moment I had handed him the candle, however, he threw off the cloak and presented a most hideous and frightful appearance, vomiting blue and white flame from his mouth while his eyes resembled red balls of fire. She also reported that he wore a large helmet and his clothing, which appeared tight-fitting, resembled white oilskin. No one was ever caught and identified as Spring-Heeled Jack, which of course led to numerous theories of his nature and identity. Skeptical investigators have dismissed these stories though and claim Spring-Heeled Jack is a product of mass hysteria, which developed around various stories of a boogeyman and devil."
Coming in at number 5, we've got water blades. While this may be a tale told around the world, it seems to have a strong presence in Italy. Sure, the name sounds cool, maybe even conjuring up some images of wicked aquatic swords, but the reality of water blades is horrific. In fact, if you really like water parks, you might want to skip this entry altogether. I don't want to just ruin them forever for you. We've all heard of razor blades and other assorted sharp objects showing up where they shouldn't. Halloween candy, playground equipment, door handles, and more. But those are all relatively controllable once you've realized the present danger. Water blades, on the other hand, will rip and tear until there's nothing left. The urban legend floating around implies that some folks have been fastening razor blades to parts of water slides at popular theme parks in Italy. You can imagine what might happen if someone went slip sliding down one of these horrible traps. Maim is an understatement in cases like these. Thankfully, this urban legend seems to be staunchly set in the false category. For something that purportedly happens quite often, reports of such activity are very rare. The actual affliction of rapidly descending individuals doesn't seem to happen. Still, the legend must be very effective, especially because it seems to get told so often. I suppose the lesson to be learned from this one is be careful using public facilities. Good advice, especially in these days and times. Coming in at number 4, we've got Pier Zanfretta's alien encounters. Everyone knows a friend of a friend who claims to have been abducted by aliens, and if not abducted, then maybe they saw a UFO or something. But this Italian security guard has a claim to fame so out there it might as well be in outer space. He says that he was abducted by aliens 5 times over the course of 3 years. All abductions happened in Genoa, all apparently while he was still working the night shift. Skeptics, as skeptics do, dismiss these claims, but apparently he's given details of each abduction while under the influence of truth serum. Pretty astronomical, don't you think? The very first abduction occurred late one night. Zanfretta was patrolling and saw what appeared to be 4 lights. After seeing this, the engine, lights, and radio went out in his patrol car. Thinking, as most security guards should, that there might be thieves about, he ran over to investigate. He did not discover a group of miscreants though. No, he found himself face to face with some extraterrestrial life. A UFO was floating above and he was abducted by these outer space dwelling individuals. While approaching the so-called scene of the crime, Zanfretta was grabbed from behind. When he turned around, he saw a creature he could only describe as an enormous, green, ugly, and frightful creature with undulating skin, as though he were very fat or dressed in a loose gray tunic, no less than 10 feet tall. This, of course, was only the beginning of Zanfretta's galactic incidents. He's run into interplanetary assailants again and again, sometimes even when he had backup. Following some encounters, special investigators were called in. They discovered distinct markings on the ground that didn't seem of human origin, but nobody but Zanfretta has laid eyes on the creatures themselves. His claims have intensified the belief of an alien presence near Genoa and has made a bit of a celebrity out of the now elderly security guard. His last abduction took place in 1980 while he was under close observation. These days, he claims that the aliens contact him directly, communicating with questionable sexual motivation. So if you're at all interested in close encounters with the third kind, Genoa might be the place to be. Coming in at number 3, we've got the Mazzarol. Speaking of non-human entities, let's take a quick trip to the mountains. The Italian Dolomites, to be specific. No relation to the comedian turned movie star recently played by Eddie Murphy. This mountain range sits stoutly in northeastern Italy and is full of legends and secrets. Plenty of cryptids and creatures are said to roam these mysterious mountains, from fairies to wizards and witches to mythical royalty. But the creature that piques my interest the most is the Mazzarol. In the valleys of Belluno province, this myth is still well known and widespread. This tiny, playful creature resembles a gnome, so make sure you tag your friends and let them know they've been gnomed. Woo! Now that I've made my requisite meme reference for the day, I can get to the actual details. This tiny, cap-wearing dude dressed in red wanders around the woods. For him to simply wander would be kind of boring though, so of course there's some darkness to this myth. He loves to find folks traveling around dusk and then lead them astray. Anyone who treads on top of his footprints is compelled by forces unknown to follow them all the way back to the no man's cave, after which they will forget everything about themselves. Many a tourist has fallen victim to the Mazzarol's mean-spirited trickery. Some legends even say that the Mazzarol will abduct the occasional individual and make them his slave. The story goes that the gnome managed to steal a young woman away from her village and put her to work. He was kind during this time and taught her many skills: cheese making, butter churning, and more. He even promised to teach her how to extract wax from whey. However, he was never able to complete this final task, as one day a hunter stumbled upon the missing girl and brought her back home. A remedy made from goat's milk brought her memory back, and the girl, overwhelmed with gratitude, taught the villagers how to make cheese and butter. To this day though, nobody has figured out how to extract wax from whey. Maybe someone will seek out the Mazzarol and find out though. Coming in at number 2, we've got the Witches of Montamatana. More mountainous mythical monsters are waiting for you. If you make your way out to Montamatana, you will find world-class hiking and some unexpected extracurriculars. That's right, you can go witch hunting. Years ago, it was said that this mountain was a popular spot for witches to perform rituals and human sacrifices. They practiced their magics upon the crags and cliffs and amassed great fortunes. Reincarnations of these witches are said to return often in search of their material wealth from past lifetimes. The reality of this wealth is often called into question, but that doesn't stop treasure seekers from braving the range. Some of these booty seekers say they've encountered violent witches willing to slit their throats, but have somehow made it out alive. Maybe other proverbial pirates didn't make it out so well. Either way, Montamatana is well known for magic, and you'd probably be best off if you just avoided making the perilous journey at night, unless you'd like to run into some witches, and in that case I'll reserve judgment. And finally, at number 1, we've got Poveglia Island. This tiny island about a half-mile from Venice has been shut off from the public for years. Some call it the Plague Island. Why? Well, I'll get to explaining. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, this fortified island was used as a quarantine station. Over 160,000 infected folks were brought here to live out their last painful days away from the healthier portion of the population. Many mass graves have been discovered nearby over the years, proving how unfortunate anyone who paid Poveglia a visit really was. Napoleon stored weapons on this island as well, and when it was discovered, many small battles were waged. This, of course, added to the island's body count. Even later on, a mental hospital was built on the island. Legends say that one of the doctors in charge would treat his patients horribly, often torturing them and tossing them from the bell tower. With all these horrifying historic events taking place on the island, it's no wonder that folks think it's haunted. In fact, there's absolutely zero public access to this island. The folks in charge have deemed it too dangerous to visit. Venturing out to Poveglia is literally illegal. What could they be hiding out there? The wild and wicked history makes folks think that there might be something sinister waiting in the sandy shadows. Anyone else craving pizza all of a sudden? Maybe pasta and parm? Or am I the only one who gets hungry after talking about ghosts? Is that weird? Starting us off at number 5, we've got the Pied Piper. We all know the legend of the Pied Piper at this point. This legend slash fairy tale dates way back and has different regional variations. Some say that the flautist drew snakes away from a town, others say it was rats. In various versions of the stories, Mr. Pied Piper can be portrayed as generous, greedy, benevolent, or evil. It's all up to the storyteller. However, in Transylvania's version, he was a terrifying hypnotist. See, at some point, there was an abundance of rats in a small German town. The townsfolk didn't know what to do until the Pied Piper showed up. Using his bewitching tunes, he paraded the rats out of town, never to return. He came back to the village expecting to be lauded as a hero and paid a sum of money, and neither of these things happened. He did his very best to convince the townsfolk that his services were worth their weight in gold, but they never did pay him. This made him quite upset. Leaving the town, he came up with a horrible revenge scheme. The next week, he returned, musical instrument in hand. This time, the goal was not rats or other pests. No, he wanted to lure away the town's children. And so he did, playing a new, hypnotizing song that tugged at the hearts and minds of all the kids around. He once again paraded out of town, but this time with their future in tow. By the time all the adults realized what had happened, it was too late. What did the Pied Piper do with these children? Well, there are different theories. A particularly grim idea is that he led them all right off a cliff, like human lemmings. Yikes. Another less terrible one that'll link us to Transylvania is that he led them to a cave in the region and sealed it up. Eventually, the kids did escape and they settled in the Romanian countryside. Some say that's why you can find plenty of blonde-haired, blue-eyed German speakers in the area. Coming in at number 4, we've got the Liar's Bridge. Oh, you're all in trouble. I see you down in the comments posting first like 10 comments deep and claiming that you don't like my shirts. I know fraud when I see it. Nobody better try to cross that bridge unless you're down to die. Okay, I'll elaborate. There's a bridge in Sibiu that has quite the reputation. It's said that anyone who lies while crossing it will cause it to collapse. That is serious. This legend has become so popular that many brides-to-be are required to declare their love and purity while crossing it. And if they're being dishonest, well, of course, there's no way that the bridge would still be standing if this were really the case, as people love to lie. However, some have a less dramatic tale to tell, that the bridge will make certain noises upon the delivery of a lie, which could have something to it. The origins of the lying bridge are up in the air, but there are a few different explanations. Some claim that lying or adulterous spouses and fiancés would be tossed off the bridge if their impropriety was discovered. This would definitely explain the modern practices associated with the bridge. Others say that merchants who cheated their customers would be met with the same fate. Overcharge or sell something under false pretenses and take a dip. It could also originate with tales of cadets coming to town, wooing local lasses, promising them the world, and then disappearing forever. I would say that all these scenarios could result in a bridge famous for ending liars. Would you be willing to take a stroll across the footpath? Coming in at number 3, we've got Bau-Bau. It really does seem that every culture has their own version of the boogeyman. I suppose parents got really fed up with their young children, eh? Something we can all relate to. Bau-Bau is exactly that, a Romanian boogeyman. However, I find this figure to be even scarier than lots of the other children snatchers. See, the Bau-Bau stays in the same home as the kids. This cloaked figure is believed to appear whenever children misbehave, and is always waiting for his chance from a hiding place somewhere in the house. Sometimes it's the broom closet, other times it's the storeroom. Either way, I bet this knowledge scared the daylights out of a bunch of Transylvanian kids. Imagine playing around and coming face to face with the door concealing a mysterious man who will take you away for acting up. With this knowledge, I bet kids were actually quite well behaved. Unlike boogeymen in other cultures, the kidnappings also only last for a little while. The Bau-Bau will grab disobedient kids and hold on to them for a year. So you don't immediately get turned into soup or drowned in a river, but instead you have to live with this terrifying man for 365. Give or take. No friends, no family, no good food, just hard work and a scary supervisor. If anyone did get taken away, it probably scarred them for life. After the year, they get returned home, and I'm sure their lives are never the same. Coming in at number 2, we've got the ghosts of Teleki Mansion. Here we go, some real Transylvanian ghost stories. The region is known for its beautiful architecture and castles, so there's no surprise that all sorts of ghastly tales are attached to the ornate buildings. Unfortunately, Dracula's castle is Bram Stoker's invention and doesn't really exist. But there are plenty more spooky facades from where that came from. One such tale originates in the Teleki Mansion. This rundown and abandoned building was once an extravagant abode, but these days most locals do their best to avoid it. It's actually relatively close to the university town of Cluj-Napoca, in a smaller town called Okna Mures. Legend says this mansion is haunted by the drunken ghosts of soldiers. During the Second World War, a squad of soldiers broke into the mansion. They'd heard that there was plenty of good wine in the cellars and decided it would be a good night to imbibe. After locating the gigantic barrels, they had themselves a grand old time. As soldiers tend to do when given downtime with lots of alcohol, They got drunk. A little too drunk, probably. I say this because they ended up goofing around with their guns and firing them inside of the mansion. After causing a mess and a half, one unlucky marksman hit an unintended target. His bullet pierced one of the gigantic barrels, which started to flood the cellar. In all likelihood, a couple of barrels were probably punctured. Gallons and gallons of wine rushed into the underground room, drowning the soldiers before they could escape. I suppose that's as good a way to go as any, drowning in wine. Although I think the soldiers might have enjoyed it a little bit more if it was in their bellies rather than their lungs. And finally, at number 1, we've got people eating lakes. Sorry to all you Great Lakes swimmers out there, the Transylvanian bodies of water tend to be a little more aggressive than others. Of course, they don't actually eat people, but they drown enough experienced swimmers that folks started to claim that they had an appetite. One such lake is Lake Vendrell, which is known for devouring even the most skillful of swimmers. Remember folks, don't eat before going swimming, always have a buddy, and try to avoid voracious waterways. If the disappearances of swimmers wasn't enough, locals have also been known to find bloody chunks of people floating around. That doesn't usually happen when somebody drowns, right? Another lake famous for consuming is Lesser Lake. Apparently this oversized puddle once drowned an entire town. Something gave way, causing the lake to flood in and envelop everything. Neighboring towns thought the church was celebrating something based on all the noise the bells were making, but nope, the bells were ringing because the church was literally descending under the water. So yeah, you better watch your back around those Transylvanian lakes. They'll grab you before you can say backstroke. Does that change anyone's travel aspirations? Probably not. The spooky mysteries are a big draw for a lot of folks visiting Romania. Just don't go looking for Dracula's castle, eh?
Number 5, the licked hand. This one's got many names. The licked hand. I always knew it as humans can lick too. The story goes that a girl is staying home alone on Halloween for the first time, with only the family dog to keep her company. While reading the news, she reads a story of an escaped convict the police are looking for and alert the neighborhood to be on the watch for. Naturally, she's terrified, so she decides the safest thing to do will be to lock herself in the house, lock all the doors, turn all the lights off, and spend the night in bed, letting the stress wash over her. She takes the pup to bed with her for comfort, and she drifts off to sleep, but wakes up in the middle of the night, hearing a loud, constant dripping noise coming from the shower. She's scared since she's the only one in the house and she hasn't used it, but chalking it up to just maybe being a leaky faucet, she tries to get back to sleep and offers her hand to her dog, letting it lick her hand to calm her down. The next morning, she wakes up and goes to the bathroom to see what happened, and screams when she discovers the body of her dog hanging from the shower. And written in the mirror in dried blood is the phrase, "Humans can lick too." Classic, absolute classic. It might be Halloween, but we bring you the scares all year round. I'll scare you on Christmas, I don't care. Hit the subscribe button and join us for the best scary stuff on the net at Top 5 Scary. Number 4, poisoned candy. Trick or treat? Well, why not both? This is probably another one of the most recognized urban legends on this list, and inevitably, every single October, some small town will put out an article about it, and people will start to get worried about the fear of someone putting something sinister in your little one's trick-or-treat goodie bag. This legend has gone back pretty much since trick-or-treating has been commonplace, but rose to huge mainstream prominence and myth status around the 70s and 80s, where it's now since become an endlessly reshared, freaky story that happened to a friend of a friend. All kinds of variations on this one pop up, but the most common ones you hear are sadistic pranksters putting razor blades in candy, somehow, or poisoning candy, broken glass, you name it. One very dramatic twist is suggesting that somehow people would poison their kids' candies with illegal narcotics. Something I've always wondered about this particular legend, it always gets passed around, but no one ever stops to question just how much effort this would be. I mean, repackaging the candies, getting them in there. Like, outside of if you went trick-or-treating at maybe Jigsaw's house, I can't really see this happening. And even then, he usually gives you a pretty decent heads up. He has the little puppet explain the game. Now, despite the long-term popularity of this myth, it hasn't actually been proven. Not once. A criminology professor from Delaware named Joel Best did a deep dive in 2019 on this phenomenon, studying police reports all the way back to the 1950s and found it remarkably inconclusive, stating that almost every single report of tampered candy comes back to being a hoax or ends up being a cover-up for something else. Besides the point though, as evil as putting a razor blade in an apple would be, giving out an apple already on Halloween is already dangerously delusional behavior, and that should be considered criminal on its own. Number 3, clowns. Please tell me you remember this one. This was like a real problem for a hot minute. 2016 was the first time things were getting very weird. For a while, we were experiencing a record-breaking case of scary clown fever. Between Pennywise terrifying us from ever going near a sewer grate, Jared Leto terrifying us from ever going back to the movies, we were all on edge when it came to rainbow wigs and big shoes. Recent polls of Americans have showed that almost 40% of all Americans say they have a deep fear of clowns. It's understandable. Between the movies and the constant urban myths, clowns get a very bad rap. While North America was coming down bad with coulrophobia, we just could not stop seeing evil clowns everywhere. It became a trend, or plague, maybe more fitting, of people dressing up as their favorite terrifying clowns and just standing around the neighborhood, haunting and scaring anybody who passed them by. Naturally, this made it rife for urban legendary. All manner of stories came out of these sinister clowns abducting people, attacking people, and some truly dark legends saying these clowns were stalking their prey, but we don't know how many of these were actually true. You know, some people even wondered if there was a conspiracy going on involving a shadowy cabal of scary clowns working in tandem to scare people, presumably all driving around in the same little car that fit 30 of them. So what was it? Was it all just viral marketing for a horror movie? A lot of people assumed it had something to do with it, although the studios vehemently denied any connection. It eventually scared people so much that in the United States, some companies like Target stopped selling clown costumes and paraphernalia altogether. Some neighborhoods even instituted bans on clown costumes. Really, actually, they banned clowns, like the town from Footloose banned dancing. In the end, like all trends, it faded off, but that doesn't mean it won't still be in our memories for a long, long time. Number 2, the Bunny Man. Now, I've always been a huge fan of the slasher movies. Michael Myers, Ghostface, Voorhees, there's just something really cool about a big terrifying lunatic running around with a mask and a blade. It's kind of cool because it's the thing that only exists in movies, you know? It's not a real life thing, right? Well, enter the Bunny Man, a real-life horror story straight out of your worst B-movie nightmares. The first reported sighting of the Bunny Man was on October 19th, 1970. Right before All Hallows Eve. A young couple, an Air Force cadet, one Robert Bennett, and his young wife, were visiting family in Burke, Virginia. They drove down to Guinea Road in Burke, and at around midnight, the couple pulled their car to the side of the road. They say it was to visit an uncle who lived across the street, but I'll just say, yeah, I'm sure that's why you parked on the street in the middle of nowhere at midnight, but that's neither here nor there. What's there is that while the two were sitting in the car, presumably discussing politics and working hard, they heard crashing noises and noticed the front window had been smashed, and on the seats lay a hatchet. They saw something walking towards them, a man wearing all white with long white ears, screaming at them that they were on private property. The couple hoofed it, naturally, and told police exactly what they saw. A tall man in a bunny mask with a hatchet. Now sadly for all of our sleep schedules, this wouldn't be the last time anyone saw the Bunny Man. Not even 2 weeks later, a security guard, one Paul Phillips, was walking home at night down Guinea Road, where he saw an odd man wearing a bunny mask and a suit sitting on an unfinished porch. The security guard, braver than I would have been, approached the man to see if he needed some help. The Bunny Man then drew the hatchet he had hidden and began wildly slashing the porch, screaming at Phillips that if he didn't leave, he'd chop his head right off. Now, those two sightings back to back were the most widely documented Bunny Man sightings, reported to the police, and are most likely actually real. From then on, though, the townsfolk of Burke, Virginia, the Bunny Man would become an urban myth. Sightings and stories would pass around with all manner of sinister details getting added to Bunny Man's legacy. The truth is, the Bunny Man was never found, and to this day, no one knows who he was, what his deal was, or what manner of darkness he was hiding behind those big floppy ears. And number 1, the decoration. Who doesn't love a haunted house? Nothing like wandering through the dark and having a bored, slightly sadistic teen jump out at you with a scary mask. Sometimes they're pretty scary, I'm not gonna lie. Sometimes they're pretty corny, you know? Plastic skeletons and rubber bats aren't that terrifying, right? Well, in 1976, a production crew was filming an episode of The $6 Million Man set in a carnival, and they needed a haunted house background to shoot with, so they went to New Pike Amusement Park in Long Beach. The crew began readjusting the decorations to accommodate all of their equipment, and the team wanted to take down a hanging mummy prop that was blocking a shot. And while the team was moving what they thought to be nothing more than cheap plastic and paper mache, they broke the arm of the dummy and then revealed the human bones inside of it. Yeah. Turns out the dummy mummy was a real embalmed human body. How no one noticed that is beyond me. But just think of that for a second. How many people do you think walked through that exact haunted house without knowing that cheesy little mummy was a real body hanging there with them?
The phrase "walk a mile in my shoes" takes on chilling connotations when the shoes are probably made of real human skin. And although the creation of such a pair sounds so gruesome as to be unbelievable, these shoes exist and are displayed at the Carbon County Museum in Rawlins, Wyoming, where additional items reveal more of the story of the mysterious outlaw, Big Nose George Parrott. So what led to him to such a grisly end? Well, even before he died, this man was known for frontier crimes. He had been arrested for horse theft, tried by a justice of the peace, and acquitted. He was also believed to have kept headquarters in the hole-in-the-wall country west of present-day Casey, Wyoming, with a number of other outlaws at the time. So, not a good man. He developed a reputation for stealing from travelers on stagecoaches, and then progressed to train robberies. Specifically, in August of 1878, Big Nose George and his gang, which included Dutch Charlie Burris, planned a theft from the Union Pacific Railroad pay car near Como, Wyoming, east of Medicine Bow. At that time, the UPRR carried cash via the pay car monthly for its own company payroll. So the bandits loosened a spike on the rails, wrapped it with telegraph wire, and hid in the bush, planning to tug the spike and dislodge the rails to derail the train so they could steal away with the money. But sharp-eyed railroad employees spotted the wobbly spike, repaired the damage, and alerted lawmen before the train arrived. So Big Nose George and his men fled to Rattlesnake Canyon at the base of Elk Mountain, about 25 miles southwest of the crime. Carbon County Sheriff's Deputy Robert Widowfeld and Union Pacific Detective Henry Tip Vincent tracked them there, but the outlaws killed them. So Big Nose George and his gang were later reported to have stolen several $1,000s in cash from a Miles City, Montana territory merchant named Con, when in spring of 1879, Con accompanied the military paymaster's wagon train from nearby Fort Keogh to Bismarck, Dakota territory. Now Con was traveling to the east on a purchasing errand. The soldiers were headed to the North Pacific Railroad to retrieve funds to be distributed at the fort. One account indicates that the criminals apparently bragged in the Miles City bars about their recent successful exploits, including the Wyoming Territory killings. Someone wired Carbon County Sheriff James Rankin, who headed to Montana in July of 1880, and brought Big Nose George back to Wyoming Territory. Two other members of the gang had also just escaped. Rankin escorted his charge first to Laramie, and then rode with him on the train heading to Rawlins. On September 13th of 1880, Big Nose George was arraigned in Rawlins. He told his lawyer his name was George Francis Warden, and reported his birth date as being in April 1843 in Dayton, Ohio. He first entered a guilty plea, then changed his plea to not guilty, and then on November 16th, the jury was sworn, and 2 days later, George again changed his plea, back to guilty. Okay, make up your mind, dude. A motion was filed for arrest of judgment and sentencing, and the court took this under advisement, but denied the motion on December 15th. Now at that time, death by rope necklace was the punishment for those found guilty of taking a life, and Big Nose George was sentenced to hang on April 2nd. 10 days before the scheduled execution, though, he tried to escape from the local jail. Like, I don't blame him. You wanna, make out with your life. He had used a pocket weapon to saw through the rivets on the heavy leg shackles that bound him, and struck jailer Robert Rankin in the head with them. Now, Rankin's wife, Rosa, discovered the attempted jailbreak and managed to close the outside door, thwarting Big Nose George's plans. She fired her husband's revolver in the air, and the men came running to help. Big Nose George's hands were tied behind his back, and that's when he wound up with the noose around his neck. The mob made him stand on an empty barrel, tossed a rope over the crossbar of a telegraph pole, but the rope broke, so George fell and was begging to just please end it, stop tormenting me, this is not fun. But instead the mob was like, no, we're gonna replace the noose, and this time you're gonna climb a 12-foot ladder. So this time, with the repaired leg irons weighing him down, climbing was difficult for George, and finally he to death. One report estimated a crowd of as many as 200 people gathered to watch. Nobody came forward to claim the body, but Dr. Osborne, who had been asked to be present to ensure the outlaw, died, and another Rawlins doctor, Thomas McGee, a Union Pacific Railroad physician and surgeon, claimed the corpse for medical study. Osborne made a death mask and had the outlaw skinned and the shoes made. McGee studied the criminal's brain, and Big Nose George's skull was cut into 2 pieces. McGee gave the top half to his protege, Lillian Heath, who later became Wyoming's first female physician, so congrats to her. The lower skull half was buried in a whiskey barrel with the rest of the outlaw's bones. In 1950, the whiskey barrel was discovered in Rawlins when workers were excavating for a new department store at 5th and Cedar Streets, and the skull halves were briefly reunited and then split up again. So the skull cap is now housed at the Union Pacific Railroad Museum in Council Bluffs, Iowa, and the lower half of the skull is displayed at the Carbon County Museum in Rawlins. I don't think I personally own anything made of animal products, and I don't feel like owning anything made up of human remains anytime soon. I'll leave that to my buddy Mysteria. He owns a collection of skulls, fingers, you name it. Here's a common enough fear: finding a body under the bed. So vacation couples, newlyweds, Disneyland guests, all have been the subject of an urban legend involving hotel occupants who blissfully fall asleep only to wake up to an awful stench coming from either under the bed or inside the mattress. Closer inspection reveals that a dead body has been stashed away. Presumably not anybody who's died of natural causes. Now this traveling tale has been confirmed multiple times over. At least a dozen newspaper stories have detailed hotel rooms that have doubled as body disposal sites. While the smell is usually apparent right away, at least one couple slept on a mattress containing a body in Atlantic City back in 1999. Cases in Colorado, Florida, and Virginia have also been reported. In 2010, guests at a budget lodge in Memphis were horrified to discover that they had been sleeping above the body of Sonny Millbrook, who was reported missing at the time. Fabric softener had been stuffed in the ceiling tiles to try and mask the smell, and at least 3 other occupants had also rented the room since the disappearance, which, yikes. A court eventually convicted Millbrook's boyfriend, like Keith Moody, of the crime. More recently, and by that I mean just last year, a tourist named Mr. Zong checked into a hotel in Tibet when he was made aware of a smell that was so bad that he was like, "Can I change rooms?" And 2 days later, after he had been granted the room transfer, he learned the source of the smell because he was summoned back to the original room by a group of police officers. He was like, "Yo, what's going on?" And they were like, "Oh, so somebody's died." He's like, "Okay, where?" And they're like, "Oh, just under the bed." The police mentioned that they had opened an investigation, but our guy wasn't a suspect because the body had been lying there for days before his arrival. So, great. New fear unlocked while traveling. Just gonna put that right under my fear of bedbugs. So we've all heard about some sort of boogeyman legend, right? The mythical creature that's gonna steal young humans who misbehave or whatever. So for years, young folks living in and around Staten Island kind of had goosebumps rising because of the tale of Cropsy, a boogeyman who lived in the woods and made a nocturnal habit of disemboweling anybody he stole. Parents were like, "Okay, come on, honey. That's no such thing. It's not true." Well, turns out it was real. Cropsy would drag humans from their beds, carrying a red-soaked axe in the crook of his arm, and well, ... The true identity of Cropsy was that of Andre Rand, born Frank Russian. In 1987, he was put on trial and convicted for abduction. Turns out he was connected to the rash of disappearances in the 1970s. He had a total of 5 notable alleged victims: Alice Pereira, Holly Ann Hughes, Tyahese Jackson, Hank Gaforio, and Jennifer Schweiger. He had once worked at Willowbrook, a defunct mental institution. Now, while he denied involvement in other cases, it's pretty clear that his activities had a heavy influence in the word-of-mouth stories that followed. Some folks even speculate that he was a Satanist who took the lives for sacrifices, and that he wasn't working alone. Yay. Here's a legend that terrifies me: rats in your toilet. These hardy rodents can climb, swim, and wriggle through tiny spaces with amazing agility. However, someone who has just been bitten on the butt while trying to use the bathroom might not be so impressed. Rat superpowers are near mythical. They can swim for 3 days, they can fit through holes the size of a quarter. They're highly skilled at running and climbing both horizontally and vertically across pipes, drains, and along surfaces, which are just some of the ways that rats can use drains to their advantage. In addition to these capabilities, rats can also swim up to half a mile across the water in one go, and even dive through the water to enter exposed pipes and find their way into a toilet bowl. This means that rats can easily climb up drains, which is aided by the presence of water where they can swim. And once a rat has decided it wants to enter your home, it can easily swim and climb up the U-bend of a toilet to gain entry to the toilet bowl, which is also possible for rats, who climb up drainage systems from the outside. And hey, fun fact, despite our long human history with lab rats, we know very little about the lives of the rats in our homes. If we're gonna consult the experts, veterinary scientist Chelsea Hemsworth said in an interview that we probably know more about the ecology of polar bears than we do about rats. One of the most important findings of the Vancouver Rat Project has been that rats form highly stable family groups or colonies, block by block in any study. And when people break up rat families, say by trapping or poisoning, the remaining rats are forced to move, and that's when they tend to spread disease. Yeah, no thank you, absolutely not. Here's a doozy for us to end our day with: using real corpses as props. Notorious outlaw Elmer McCurdy took on a second life following his death, because in 1911, the embalmed corpse of McCurdy became a grim sideshow attraction throughout Texas, with people eager to see the famed criminal on display in funeral parlors and carnivals. Though it's hard to document all of his travels, he eventually wound up in Long Beach, California, where someone apparently mistook him for a prop. He was hung in a funhouse at the New Pike amusement park, his humanity discovered only after a crew member on the $6 Million Man, which was filming there in 1976, tried to adjust him, and they dislodged what was a very real arm. The following year, thankfully, his corpse was put to proper rest. Which, by the way, he's not the only real corpse that's been used for entertainment. Have you ever been on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride at Disneyland? Now, I'm pretty sure the Florida version only houses prop replicas, but the California ride originally featured genuine real-life skeletal bones. They were provided by the UCLA Medical Center and placed around various locations throughout the attraction, so the morbid incorporation of actual human remains came from the Walt Disney Company's perpetual strides towards perfection and authenticity. Long story short, the technology at the time just wasn't up to par for producing realistic enough fake ones. Fortunately, don't worry, that's no longer the case. Disney has since replaced most of the real bones with realistic fake ones. But there's at least one skull that is still very much the real deal. Apparently, you'll find it in the captain's quarters on the headboard behind the dead man skeleton in the bed with a magnifying glass and map. Some sources say there are other real bones still present in the attraction, so feel free to keep a close eye next time you visit the park. I know I will when I'm visiting soon.
Coming in at number 5, the Dog Boy. Hailing from Arkansas, the legend of the Dog Boy is one of the most infamous around the state. In 1954, Gerald Floyd Bettis, born to parents Floyd and Eileen Bettis in the Bettis house, during his early years, locals would say that the boy would catch dogs and cats and keep them in his home. However, what he was doing with these animals was absolutely horrific. However, what he was known for was the treatment of his parents. It was said that he imprisoned them in the attic, keeping them in there for years. According to reports, he abused them, but he wasn't arrested for it until after the death of his father and the continued abuse of his mother. He ultimately died in prison of an overdose, but since then people have claimed that paranormal goings-on have occurred at the former home. Flickering lights, strange noises, and moving objects have all been reported over the years. In some versions of the legend, his ghost walks on all fours and is shaggy like a dog, while in other versions he appears as a towering man donning a brown jacket and a bow tie. Coming in at number 4, we have Dudley Town. Dudley Town is an abandoned settlement in Connecticut in the United States, more commonly referred to today as Ghost Town. Since the mid-1920s, the land occupied by the village has been maintained. However, due to vandalism and trespassers, the site is no longer open to the public. Now, some history before we get into the nitty-gritty of this legend. Dudley Town was never an actual town. The name was actually given to the portion of Cornwall that included several members of the Dudley family. A local rumor has since circulated online that alleges that the founders of Dudley Town were descended from Edmund Dudley, an English nobleman who was beheaded for treason during the reign of Henry VIII. From that moment on, the Dudley family was placed under a curse which followed them to America. This curse is what was ultimately blamed for instances of crop failures and mental illness in the village. On top of that, Dudley Town visitors also report seeing paranormal phenomena such as an unnerving lack of wildlife, floating orbs of light, and sinister wolf-like black shadows. Not only that, but there is also said to be a mysterious group in the area called the Dark Forest Association that is said to police the grounds with militant force. What exactly is going on in Dudley Town? I don't really want to know. Coming in at number 3, we have the Alaska Triangle. Sometimes referred to as Alaska's Bermuda Triangle, this is a place in the untouched wilderness where people have reportedly been disappearing for years now. The triangle itself connects Anchorage, where I used to live, in the south to Juneau in the southeast panhandle, to Barrow, the northernmost town in Alaska. The area in between those points is unforgiving and a place not for the faint-hearted or inexperienced. Now, the area itself began to attract attention back in the 1970s, when a small plane carrying US House Majority Leader Hale Boggs, Alaska Congressman Nick Begich, and an aide Russell Brown vanished into thin air while flying from Anchorage to Juneau. For a month after the initial disappearance, planes, military aircraft, and dozens of boats scoured the area searching for the plane. However, nothing was ever discovered. No debris, no wreckage, nothing. Following the disappearance, more and more planes began to disappear, and on top of that, hikers also began to vanish into thin air. Since 1988, it is said that more than 16,000 people have disappeared in the Alaska Triangle, which is more than twice the national average. Now, whether this is something supernatural, extraterrestrial, or simply cruel weather conditions and harsh wilderness, we don't know. However, the disappearances have been blamed on everything from aliens to energy vortexes to shape-shifting demons. However, the likely explanation is the wilderness itself. It can be truly unforgiving, and Alaska is big, most of it is untouched wilderness. Lots of bears to eat ya. Coming in at number 2, we have the Alice killings. To this very day, the Alice killings remain one of the most bizarre and unsolvable serial killings in Japan's history. Between the years of 1999 to 2005, a series of killings supposedly took place. Killings that were completely different and unrelated except for one common element, a calling card that the killer left behind each time. He would leave behind a playing card which varied from killing to killing. It would be left at each scene in an obvious location, and on the card would read Alice written in the victim's blood. According to the legend, the first victim of Alice killings was Sasaki Megumi. She was a 29-year-old restaurant owner who one day decided to walk home from a friend's house, seeing as she lived only a block away. Several people offered her a ride home, but she refused. She was seen leaving the party in the early hours of the morning. However, the next time she would be seen, she wouldn't be alive. The next morning, a couple walking in the woods discovered her body. She was supposedly torn apart, with the couple instantly calling the police. Inside the mouth of Megumi was a playing card, the Jack of Spades, which had the word Alice written on it. At the scene there was absolutely no prints discovered, only vomit, which the woman from the couple admitted was hers. The next victim was said to be Yamane Akio. He was a known singer in a band who was abducted from his apartment on February 11, 2001. His bandmates were the last to see him alive, with a missing persons report being filed within days. On the home security footage, a hooded figure was seen entering through a side door and leaving with a large garbage bag that bulged strangely. The person in the recording was never found or identified, but it is believed to be the same killer because, like last time, at the scene of the crime an Alice card was discovered, a king of diamonds clutched in his hands. However, in a bizarre turn of events in 2005, a Spanish serial killer was jailed for the murder of 6 people, and it was said that he would leave playing cards on the corpses of each victim as well. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Cropsey. Now, this legend is incredibly bizarre because it ultimately turned out to be true, and there is nothing scarier than a true urban legend. Cropsey began as an urban legend, the boogeyman of Staten Island in New York City. It was rumored that this was a homicidal madman, a person who had escaped from a mental hospital who had a hook for a hand. He was said to hunt down children, drag them back to his tunnel system which lay under an abandoned hospital, and then kill them. Parents would use Cropsey to frighten their children into being good and staying close to home. He could be anywhere, so you better behave. However, parents didn't think too much of it because after all, Cropsey was just a mere legend, right? The legend continued to spiral, with the story even being turned into a movie in the 1980s called The Burning, which follows a man named George Cropsey who goes insane after a prank leaves him horribly disfigured. However, things went from bad to worse in Staten Island when Cropsey became a reality. The boogeyman came to life in the form of Andre Rand, a homicidal madman. Rand worked as a janitor at the Willowbrook School on Staten Island, a place which was said to be horrifically cruel to its students. The school was built as a respite for children with disabilities. However, after it was revealed to be a living hell, it would close its doors in 1987. After its closure, janitor Andre Rand would continue living on the grounds and was suspected of kidnapping several children. However, despite this never being proven to be true, he was found guilty of the crime, specifically one kidnapping in 1988 and one again in 2004. The legend became so infamous across the state that a movie was made about the story and Andre Rand, simply called Cropsey.
Coming in at number 5, we got the body under the bed. I don't know if this counts as an urban legend or a universal experience. Everyone has, no exceptions, checked under their bed for monsters or something of the like. There are countless stories of robbers, murderers, doppelgangers, and assorted fireflies hanging out beneath people's mattresses, but nobody ever expects it to come true. At least, not after graduating grade school. But this is exactly what happened to a hapless couple trying to relax at a hotel after a long day. Thankfully, there wasn't a living creature lying in wait beneath the bed frame, but the body below wasn't much better. The couple shuffled into their room and immediately noticed that something was off. It smelled real bad. Corpse-like even. If you checked into a hotel room and the first thing you noticed was the distinct odor of rotting flesh, you'd be upset. So the couple called down to the front desk and complained about the stench. After moving the duo to a less rotten room, the smell was investigated, leading to the discovery of a dead body beneath the bed. The state of the body also implied that it had been lying there for weeks as different guests stayed in the room. I'm sure they were pleased as punch when they discovered that their hotel stay involved an undiscovered cadaver underneath their sleeping heads. What do you even do as a hotel staff at that point? Do you own up to the corpse being under the bed, or do you just hope the story fizzles out? Either way, the classic myth of the below the bed body has been proven true, at least in this case. Is it worth checking below the hotel bed now? Coming in at number 4, we've got rats in the toilet bowl. I'll preface this entry with an unfortunate truth. Crocodiles can't actually survive in the New York sewer system. I know it's hard to take, but it's true. Even if folks kept them as pets and then flushed them when they were babies, they wouldn't survive long during New York winters, and we wouldn't see them crawling up through the pipes anytime soon. Plus, living in filth is bad for most creatures. Creatures that aren't rats, I guess. Here is another unfortunate truth. Rats have been found in people's toilets after crawling around in the plumbing. And they're not going to be too friendly after making that trip either. See, drain plumbing is the perfect size for a mangy rodent to wriggle through, especially if there's scavenging undigested food matter left behind after your last trip to the porcelain throne. Rats are often attracted to sewage lines thanks to these particular waste particles and will sometimes travel along to the very end of the line being your toilet bowl. They're very good swimmers, you know. It's okay to have a complete and total mental breakdown if this happens to you. Nobody expects you to keep it together if a sewage-covered rodent places itself inches from your private bits. They're not quite as suave as Roddy the Rat from Flushed, unfortunately. There's one tale where a woman in Virginia got bit on the butt by one of these spelunking scrabblers. So yeah, check your toilet bowl before you hunker down, unless you're cool with some tiny teeth on your taint. And if you do end up seeing one, treat it like any other filthy floater and flush it. Coming in at number 3, we've got reappearing cities. To be fair, this is more of a legend than an urban one, but it's fascinating just the same. Legendary lost cities are a staple in the imaginations of explorers. El Dorado, Aztlan, Atlantis, wouldn't it be incredible to find them? Imagine the discoveries that might be made, the lost history recovered. Although many have sought these locations out, few have succeeded, which is why it's so exciting when one does reappear. Way back in the 18th century, a British tourist wrote down the story of a group of temples hidden under the sea in southern India. It seemed that a wicked flood subsumed 6, leaving the 7th still standing on the shore. For centuries, this legend stood as people told the tale of the curtailed temples. Then, following a destructive tsunami in 2004, the temples were revealed to the world once more. The coastline receded far enough that people could finally get a closer look at them, drowned so many years ago. The tsunami itself was devastating, so I'm not sure if it was the best trade. And let's be real, hidden temples often contain curses waiting to be unleashed upon the world. Something tells me that these making a triumphant return might bring some additional dread to the surface. Nobody go looking for hidden treasure now, you hear? Coming in at number 2, we've got the Maine Hermit. All the scariest stories come from New England, just as Stephen King and H.P. Lovecraft. With all of the iconic additions to the horror canon these two provided alone, there are enough urban legends to fuel Boston's surroundings for generations. But if you look a little closer at the yarns these legends are spinning, you'll realize that a lot of them just simply can't be true. At least not in the way that we could ever understand. There are no deadlights, no Pennywise the Clown, no demonic cornfields or Wendigo-infested graveyards, no mysterious fishman hybrids, no Miskatonic University, no Arkham. If you have proof to the contrary, please let me know. I would love to be proven wrong on this. But for now, we'll have to look to an actual local legend that was inevitably proven true. If you were the outdoorsy type, you might have made it out to Central Maine's North Pond area. You might have noticed that some of your stuff was disappearing without explanation. This kind of behavior went on for decades, with vacationers, cottagers, and campers all experiencing some sort of disappearing supplies. This led to folks believing that a single entity was sticking around and stealing their stuff. And guess what? They were eventually proven right. It was discovered that a man by the name of Christopher Knight had been living alone in the woods for upwards of 25 years. That's a long time to be living alone unbothered, but good old Chris Knight knew exactly what he was doing. Living off the land, largely, but also committing small-scale steals whenever he needed something a little extra. And he's probably living the life, too. In the end, he was a pretty reasonable guy. Most folks would assume that hermits are volatile and dangerous, but Chris seemed to have a good head on his shoulders. When confronted by a warden, he admitted that he was behind something like 40 robberies a year. An honest hermit, who knew? And finally, at number 1, we've got corpse decorations. It's a classic campfire tale that has evolved with the times. A secret serial killer uses the bodies of his victims to decorate an abode, or a twisted mortician convinces kids to gallivant beneath pieces of people on Halloween. It's been done in movies, on TV, and in video games galore, but there's no way this actually happens, right? Well, actually, it did once. It wasn't as malicious as many of the tales make it seem, though. There wasn't some crazed lunatic hanging a real body from the eaves just to get away with it, no. Instead, it was an accidental accentuation. Way back in the early 20th century, there was a criminal by the name of Elmer McCurdy. After dying, McCurdy was embalmed and carted around as a sideshow attraction all across Texas. People came from far and wide to see the preserved body of a notorious criminal. Funeral parlors, carnivals, and all sorts of cavalcades of perversion showed off the body. It was so well traveled that for a while, people totally lost track of it. Eventually, over 50 years later, the body made its return as a funhouse prop. Somehow, an employee of the New Pike amusement park saw this preserved corpse and said, "Yep, that's a fake body, all right." So Elmer went up and stayed up for quite a while. In fact, the only reason he was discovered to be real was that a crew member from a movie being shot on location tried to adjust the body for a shot. In doing so, Elmer's arm came right off. The man was just doing his job and ended up tearing a dead man's limb from its body. Oh my. So while it's unlikely that creepy Mr. Jenkins down the street is hanging real corpses from his oak tree, you better double check your props before putting them up. My oh my, the things we take at face value can be astonishing.
Coming in at number 5, we have Hell's Gate in Oxford. Known as the most haunted bridge, we have Hell's Gate in Oxford, Alabama. Hell's Gate Bridge earned its name because many people believe that when you stop on the bridge and glance over your shoulder, the road behind you resembles the fiery gates of hell. Several locals have experienced this over the years, but that isn't all of it. The most popular urban legend about this bridge takes place during the 1950s when a young couple's car drove off the bridge and into the water below. Supposedly, if you stop on the bridge and turn off your lights, a member of the couple will enter your vehicle and leave a wet spot on the seat. The bridge was officially closed to traffic in late 2005 and early 2006 when the new road, known as Leon Smith Parkway, was built from Friendship Road to the Oxford Exchange, connecting it to the new outdoor mall. On Saturday, January 13, 2007, the legend of the bridge lives on, as after it was closed, the OPS team decided to go to this bridge and investigate the paranormal activity claims. The team arrived at the site around 10 PM and placed voice recorders on each end of the bridge. In the middle, they set up a webcam suited for night viewing and took lots of pictures with the digital and 35mm cameras. They wrapped up their investigation sometime after midnight. After going through the evidence, they did not detect anything that night, though one of the members did see an object coming toward the group while we were sitting on the end of a bridge. And just because nothing suspicious was caught that night doesn't mean it isn't haunted. Coming in at number 4, we have the vanishing of Orion Williamson. This urban legend is different from most and revolves around the farmer Orion Williamson. One hot July afternoon in 1854, Orion was walking on his farm near Selma. Reportedly, Williamson's wife and family were on the front porch of the farmhouse. Then, neighbors passed by and waved to Williamson, who was walking in ankle-deep grass. Orion waved back before vanishing right before the eyes of his family and neighbors. The party ran to the site, frantically searching, but found no sign of Williamson. Soon, a search party was formed, and 300 men are said to have come to search for the farmer. No sign of Orion materialized, even though the effort continued well into the night. As news of the inexplicable vanishment spread, more volunteers and a team of geologists arrived. They dug up the field to see if the ground was in any way unstable or unusual. There was only solid rock a few feet below the surface. No holes, crevices, or cave-ins, nothing that could explain the event. Reportedly, Mrs. Williamson and her son could hear Orion's voice calling for help for weeks afterward, growing fainter and fainter. Each time they would rush out onto the field only to find nothing. Gradually, Orion's voice faded into a mere whisper, then disappeared forever. After no amount of searching turned up anything, the judge declared Orion dead. The following spring, it is said, a circle of dead grass appeared to mark the spot of the unlucky farmer's disappearance. The German scientist Maximilian Hearn, author of the book Disappearance and Theory Thereof, speculated that Orion walked into a spot of universal ether. He believed these places lasted a few seconds and could completely destroy all matter within them. Another scientist theorized a magnetic field had disintegrated Orion's atomic structure and sent him into another dimension. In at number 3, we have the ghost of Sally Carter. The story of Sally Carter begins in the mansion of Cedarhurst in 1823 when Sally was visiting her sister. While she was visiting, she was struck by a quick and fatal illness and passed away on November 28, 1837, just 3 weeks short of her 16th birthday. Sally had loved the estate, and that is why some say you can still feel her presence there today. Reports of Sally's ghost go back to 1919 when a 17-year-old boy from Dothan, Alabama slept outside Sally's bedroom. That stormy night he had a dream that Sally visited him, asking him to prop up her tombstone. When he awoke the next morning, he explained the strange dream and told his family that he was going to Sally's grave. They laughed at him, but when he arrived, her stone had indeed fallen over in the storm. This popular local legend ends with the boy going back to his hometown of Dothan, never to return to Huntsville again. Sally's grave was in the family plot on the estate. She had so many visitors, there was a well-worn path from the road. She did unfortunately also have many teenagers vandalize her grave. That is why in December of 1982, Sally, her sister, and her sister's 3 children were relocated to an undisclosed location in the Maple Hill Cemetery. Her casket was relocated, but some claim that when her grave was excavated, the casket Sally was supposed to spend eternity in was empty, besides tombstones falling over and caskets being empty of mortal remains. Others have reported seeing sights of Sally walking the grounds of the estate she loved so much. A pastor last guard at Cedarhurst heard Sally walking upstairs while working one night. After the woman's shift ended, she realized that she had lost some money while doing rounds. After searching the grounds, hearing footsteps following her and the unnerving flickering of her flashlight as if the batteries were ready to die, the guard gave up the money for lost. But once she returned to the guard shack, her flashlight flickered brightly, shining directly on the cash she had given up looking for. It was then she chose to thank Sally and claims to have heard a young woman's laugh in return. Someone who knew both the Thornton and Grace families who lived in the house had a friend who slept in Sally's room. When asked what it was like, the friend told him about doors opening and closing by themselves, covers getting snatched off the bed, and light switches being tripped. The girl thought it was all rather annoying, but after a while got used to it and ignored the strange things going on. In at number 2 we have Hugging Molly. This urban legend comprises of the Witch of Hugging Molly, haunting the town of Abbeville, Alabama. Legend claims that a phantom woman would appear to children, but only at night. The witch would squeeze them tightly and then proceed to scream in their ears, though she never harmed them other than causing ringing in their ears. Molly had been described as a 7-foot figure, wearing dark clothes and a wide-brimmed hat. Jimmy Rain, an Abbeville local and lifelong resident, grew up hearing the legend of Hugging Molly. For him and his friends, she was more than just an urban legend, but a real ghost haunting the grounds of his town. One night, Jimmy and his good friend Tommy Murphy heard the story from Tommy's dad. His dad told them he knew Hugging Molly was real because she had sprung from the shadows and hugged him one night. They were convinced it had to be true. Who Molly is still up for debate, but many believe that she lost her own children and go after local children to make up for the lost time with her own child. Some say her ghost still walks the street of Abbeville late in the night, sweeping her black skirt as she goes. And finally, in at number 1 we have Slag of Sloss Furnace. From 1882 to 1971, Birmingham's Sloss furnaces transformed coal and ore from surrounding acres into the hard steel that would pave the way for the Industrial Revolution. In the early 1900s, James Slaggs Wormwood was foreman of the graveyard shift, the period between sunset and sunrise, where he was in charge of a crew of nearly 150 workers. During the summer months, the temperatures throughout the plant would reach more than 120 degrees. Lack of sleep, the heat, and low visibility made working the furnace literally a living hell, and only the poorest of workers desperate for employment would work it. To impress his supervisors, James Slagg would make his workers take dangerous risks, forcing them to speed up production. During his reign, 47 workers lost their lives, 10 times more than any other shift in the history of the furnace. Countless others lost their ability to work due to accidents, mishaps, and even a recorded explosion in the small blowing engine house in 1888 that left 6 workers burned blind. In October of 1906, James Slaggs Wormwood lost his footing at the top of the highest blast furnace and plummeted into a pool of melted iron ore, where he melted instantly. It was reported that Slagg must have become dizzy from the methane gas created by the furnace and lost his balance, but Slagg had never set foot on top of the furnace during his years of employment, leaving the death of James still a mystery. The legend of Slaggs grew each year after his disappearance. Workers complained of an unnatural presence they increasingly encountered throughout the worksite. One work reports that on a night watchman in 1926 they sustained injuries after being pushed from behind and told angrily by a deep voice to get back to work. The man, upon searching the grounds, could find no sign of any other living person, only to assume it was the spirit of James Slagg. Another suspicious story happened in 1947 when 3 supervisors turned up missing, where they would be found unconscious and locked in the small boiler room in the southeastern part of the plant. None of the 3 could explain exactly what happened to them. All agreed they were approached by a man whose skin appeared badly burnt and who angrily shouted at them to push some steel. Probably the most horrifying tale occurred in 1971 when the night before the plant closed, Samuel Blumenthal, the Sloss night watchman, who was nostalgically taking a last look about, found himself face to face with what he recalls being the most frightening thing he had ever seen. He described it simply as evil and a half-man, half-demon who tried to push him up the stairs. When Blumenthal refused, the monster began to hit him. In addition, another investigation was held in 2003 by the Alabama Foundation for Paranormal Research, who insisted that there is no doubt paranormal activity on the grounds of the plant. During their investigations, they pulled data that confirms through scientific methods that the spirit entities are present and cannot be explained, while also stating that Sloss is one of the most paranormally active places our team has investigated. In at number 5 we have Jim Morrison. Born James Douglas Morrison, he was a singer, songwriter, and poet who served as the lead vocalist of the rock band The Doors. However, Morrison developed an alcohol dependency during the 60s, with him passing away unexpectedly at the age of 27 in Paris. As no autopsy was performed, the cause of his death remains unknown. He was ultimately laid to rest in the famous Père Lachaise cemetery. Over the years, his headstones were defaced or stolen until Morrison's own father placed a rather ordinary-looking one on the site with an inscription in Greek, which reads, "Against his own demon." However, in 1997, journalist Brett Meisner was visiting the cemetery when he had this photo taken of him, standing in front of Jim Morrison's headstone. However, in the background of the picture, standing in the doorway of a crypt, you can clearly see a semi-transparent figure, arms held wide, which resembles the late singer. Many state that the pose is very reminiscent of a famous photo taken of Morrison. What do you guys think though? Ghost or trick of the light? Whatever you think, it's been enough to drive more tourists to the cemetery to attempt to catch a glimpse of the famous singer. In at number 4, we have Sweeney Todd. Now, hear me out before we begin. Yes, I know that Sweeney Todd is said to hail from Victorian London, however this legend states that maybe he didn't, and maybe he walked the streets of France. First and foremost though, Sweeney Todd is a fictional character who appeared as the villain of the Victorian petty dreadful serial The String of Pearls. The tale became a staple of Victorian melodrama and London urban legend. A barber from Fleet Street, Sweeney Todd murders his customers with a straight razor and turns their bodies over to Mrs. Lovett, his partner in crime, who bakes their flesh into meat pies. However, could it be that the original Sweeney Todd was not from London, but instead hailed from medieval Paris? Legend states that Paris had its very own demon barber during the 14th century, and was perhaps the first home to the cannibalistic pastries from the murderous barber. During this time, the Rue de Marmousets was known far and wide for its succulent French delicacies, especially for those made by a butcher next door to a barbershop on the corner. The pies and pastries were said to be so tasty that even King Charles VI was said to have been a fan. From 1384 to 1387, the butcher was said to have been in cahoots with his neighbouring barber, with it being said that the pastries were so scrumptious thanks to the young flesh of the victims of the demon barber. The partnership was said to have thrived for 3 years and would have continued if their gory deeds weren't discovered. It was said that an abandoned dog was what gave them away, who was barking outside the door of the barber's. The police conducted a search and discovered heaps of humans' bones and flesh in the shed underbelly of the two shops. For their crimes, the barber and the butcher were burned alive, along with their shops, in order to exorcise the area from their evil. Coming in at number 3, the catacombs. The catacombs of Paris are underground ossuaries which hold the remains of more than 6 million people in a small part of a tunnel network built to consolidate Paris' ancient stone quarries. Now, it was largely forgotten until it became a novelty place for concerts and various other private events in the early 19th century, as well as a hotspot for urban explorers. Now, as you would expect, there are a ton of legends surrounding this creepy burial site, so I'll be listing off a handful. Let's start with the ghost of Philbert S. Park. During the French Revolution, Philbert was a doorman at the Val de Grace Hotel. During a mission to fetch a liqueur from a cellar, Philbert wound up in the Paris catacombs instead, walking around in the darkness alone with just a single candle. He became lost and confused. His body was not found until 11 years later when a group of cataphiles uncovered it. His body is now buried in the catacombs in the exact spot that he was found. Legend now states that on each November 3rd, Philbert's ghost haunts the labyrinth of the catacombs. However, the most disturbing story hails from the 1990s when a group of cataphiles were walking through the catacombs and discovered a video camera on the ground. To their surprise, the camera held footage on it. While watching the footage, it became apparent that the man filming was lost and had no idea how to escape the winding tunnels. The video then ends abruptly with the man dropping the camera on the ground and running off into the unknown. He was never discovered. However, it was this legend that many believe As Above, So Below, the movie, was based off of. Coming in at number 2, we have The Phantom of the Opera. We're all familiar with the 1986 musical based on the book by Gaston Leroux, with music by Andrew Lloyd Webber. Its central plot revolves around a beautiful soprano, Christine Daae, who becomes the obsession of a mysterious, disfigured musical genius living in the subterranean labyrinth beneath the Paris Opera House. But did you know this story is actually based on legend, with many Parisians being all too familiar with the story of the Phantom and the mysterious box number 5 at the Garnier Opera House. This legend began at the Music Conservatory on Rue Les Pelletiers, where it is said that a young pianist and a young ballerina fell in love. Planning to be wed, the pianist composed a piece of music to symbolize their love that was intended to be played at their wedding. However, that never happened because on October 28, 1873, a fire destroyed the conservatory and killed many, including the ballerina. The pianist survived but was forever scarred by the fires, particularly on his face. He abandoned the world and took refuge in the underground passage of the Garnier Opera House in order to escape the dreadful people who considered him a monster or a demon. He stayed there for the rest of his life, devoting himself to his music. Now, the pianist was never disturbed, but rumors quickly began to spiral, creating the legend of the Phantom of the Opera. The first rumors came from the opera house staff, such as stagehands and dancers. And it is also purported that box number 5 at the Garnier Opera House is said to be haunted by the mysterious phantom and should always be left vacant for him. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have the Notre Dame and the Devil's Door. Notre Dame is one of the most infamous places in French history, with it being a medieval Catholic cathedral that was consecrated to the Virgin Mary and is considered to be one of the finest examples of French Gothic architecture. However, popular interest in the cathedral blossomed after the publication of Victor Hugo's novel The Hunchback of Notre Dame back in 1831. The cathedral is holy ground, but saying that how many tourists from around the world have been ushered in by Satan himself. Some history first though. When it comes to the construction of buildings such as this one, construction always starts at the back of the building with the entrances added last. So when it came time to add the famous door to the cathedral, a man by the name of Mr. Biscornet, a young metalsmith, convinced the church to hire him. The job lasted months, with Biscornet slaving away in his workshop. However, when he finally finished, it was of course a masterpiece and blew the minds of Parisians. However, were the doors perhaps too good to be true? This all took place during the 1300s, when magic was believed and myths spread fast. So when people saw the door for the first time, they believed that Biscornet couldn't possibly have crafted it himself, and that instead he had sold his soul to the devil in exchange for the masterpiece. Stories quickly began to emerge of people claiming to have visited Biscornet during the creation and found him unconscious on the floor with the project mysteriously completed. The rumors began to spread, with priests adding fuel to the fire by claiming that the door's locks refused to work until they were sprinkled with holy water. To top things off, not long after this, the artist died, with many speculating that in order to fulfill the contract, the devil had to claim Biscornet's soul. In at number 5, we have Empire State Building Bermuda Triangle. We've all heard about the Bermuda Triangle. Also known as the Devil's Triangle, it is loosely defined as being a region in the western part of the North Atlantic Ocean. A number of aircraft and ships are said to have disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Since then, planes changed their flight path to avoid the triangle. Others avoid going anywhere near it altogether. But did you know New York has its own version of the Bermuda Triangle? It is located in Midtown, more specifically a large radius around the Empire State Building. Starting in 2008, drivers started to complain about the 5-block radius around the Empire State. Their cars would inexplicably die and refuse to start up again. It was almost every day, says Ronnie Yakubovich, manager of NYC Tire and Auto Care. He went on to explain that he would pick up the cars and tow them outside of the radius and they would suddenly start to work as normal. His best guess is that the radio signals from the broadcast beacon on the tower were disabling alarm systems in cars and preventing them from starting. But if that was so, why did this only start in 2008? The Empire State Building was opened in 1931, so why did this start so recently? I guess we'll never know what is causing the phenomenon. Maybe just avoid the area if you can. In at number 4, Super Rats of Hurricane Sandy. One New Yorker told the story of him and his roommates. They had lived peacefully in a 5th floor loft for years with barely a cockroach invading the space. Then, the winter after Hurricane Sandy, the noises began, scratching and scurrying. I walked into the kitchen one day and saw a rat the size of a small cat crawling across our food shelves, Kevin says. Traps and an exterminator proved ineffective. It was baffling that the rats would find their way to the 5th floor. Then the roommates read reports about rats fleeing inland from flooded subway tunnels after Hurricane Sandy. A theory was going around that the weaker rats were wiped out and the surviving rodents bred a new generation of tougher, meaner super rats. There are reports of super rats even today. Some businesses demand that the city steps in and does something as outside dining became more normal within the last year. The diners were being harassed by the giant rats. Many diners have had to leave due to the dangerous nature of the giant animals. They claimed the rats were getting increasingly hungry with the lack of tourism, leaving them with less to feed off on the streets. The city continues to claim that these super rats do not exist despite the number of sightings and photos of the giant rodents. Many live in fear that the rats might make their way into the apartments as they are harder to kill than the usual infestation. In at number 3 we have Cropsey. In the mid-90s, Ariel Abramowitz went to camp across from the notorious disused mental institution Willowbrook in Staten Island. She recalls counselors taking campers to an old building on the site, with something like blood smeared on the walls. They spooked them with tales of a boogeyman named Cropsey. Allegedly, he was a respected community member. He has a family and a child who he loved. One summer, he sent his child to the local camp. His son was later confirmed to have died at the camp. This sent the man mad. He disappeared from his life. No one knew where he had gone, but before he left, he vowed to get revenge on the other kids and campers. He was later found and taken to a mental hospital. The next time we would hear of him, he was described as a homicidal madman, an escaped mental patient with a hook for a hand who hunted children and dragged them back to the tunnel system that lay under the abandoned ruins of the old Seaview Hospital, a former tuberculosis sanitarium. Soon the urban legend would be unmasked as Andre Rand. Rand worked as a janitor at the Willowbrook State School on Staten Island, a place whose name alone has the power to frighten adults and children alike. The institution, built as a respite for children with intellectual disabilities, was revealed to be a living hell in the 1970s, although authorities wouldn't close the school until 1987. Rand had a long rap sheet of crimes against children. In 1983, he went to jail again after kidnapping a bus full of kids from the local YMCA and driving them to an airport. And though there wasn't enough physical evidence to charge him, police already suspected him in the disappearances of at least 4 other Staten Islanders. To this day, none of the bodies have been found. Rand's story and that of Cropsey continues to fascinate and horrify tri-state residents to this day. Coming in at number 2 we have Haunted Dakota. The Dakota building set the standard for Upper West Side apartment living, built at a time when the upper classes were only just becoming familiar with the concept of living in an apartment. It was known for having famous artists as residents, and the board were very picky about who they allowed to live there. One of the most famous couples to live at the Dakota was John Lennon and his wife Yoko Ono. Years after John Lennon was shot dead in front of his Central Park West apartment building in the Dakota, his widow Yoko Ono saw his ghost sitting at his white piano. She claims he turned to her and said, "Don't be afraid, I'm still with you." When he was alive, Lennon himself claimed to have spotted a figure wandering the halls of the Dakota, whom he referred to as the crying lady ghost. Other residents are said to have encountered the spectre of a little girl about 7 years old, smiling and laughing and greeting people in the hallways. The Dakota's original owner, Edward Clark, had an interest in the paranormal and would often host seances to communicate with the dead. The more you play with the paranormal, the more likely you are to experience paranormal activity in the future, says paranormal researcher. She believes that when people are murdered suddenly and violently, their spirits linger. In John Lennon's case, his life was cut short in his prime. He was only 40 years old. Someone like him was happy to be alive. He was working, he had a small child, he had unfinished business. It's a prime recipe for a classic haunting. And finally, in at number 1 we have Mole People. There are around 700 miles of subway tracks underneath New York City. Did you know that the large sections of the track that isn't used is home to the Mole People? Thousands of homeless people and families have created a community underground. The Mole People are living under popular parts of town without the people who are walking above even knowing they are there. They travel under cover of darkness as not to be evicted from their underground homes. Ever since the Great Depression, there have been many homeless people in New York City. During the difficult period, people started using the subway tunnels as a place to live. The places where homeless people live are dangerous. Rodents and reptiles lurk through the tunnels. There are debris and other hazards in the dark, plus the darkness conceals criminals, and Mole People are often the victims of attacks. Thieves even steal what little they have. The entrances to the subway tunnels are easily accessible by anyone who has the desire to venture into them. There are numerous entrances throughout the city. However, it is illegal to enter, and going into them can result in criminal charges. Just like any place that numerous people live, the Mole People form communities. Most of them look after each other, but there is also a kind of hierarchy. Most of them are very territorial over the section of the tunnels where they live. After all, it is their home. There are couples and even families that live underground. The sad part is these people risk losing their kids if authorities find out they do not have a place to live. So the families living in the subway do their best to stay concealed. People are not the only ones living in the subway tunnels under New York City though. Many animals live beneath the streets. Some of the Mole People even domesticate these animals and live with them. These animals keep them company in the very isolated and lonely place they call home. The Mole People do anything they can to eat and obtain the things they need. It's difficult for them though. They have to wait until it's dark to emerge from their homes. If authorities see them, they risk getting in trouble. Throughout the years, the city has made efforts to clean sections of the subway tunnels. However, the task is so vast that many abandoned areas remain untouched, especially the parts of the system that are no longer in use. As the saying goes, out of sight, out of mind. In at 5, La Ciguapa. This is a mythological creature that is commonly described as having human female form with brown or dark blue skin, backward facing feet, and very long, smooth hair that covers the body. According to folklore, it is a hypnotic creature that lurks in the Highland Mountains and deep forests of the island, waiting for the perfect moment to lure men into the woods and make them disappear. Classic. Some people believe that the Ciguapa bring death, and it is said you should not look them in the eye, otherwise you will be at risk of becoming permanently bewitched. They are considered to be magical beings, beautiful in appearance to some but horrendous to others. They are deceitful and hell-bent on capturing a wayward traveller. Now some legends suggest that not all are evil and do not wish to kill, though much evidence supports the benevolent claim. Law states that the only way to truly capture a Ciguapa is by tracking them at night during a full moon, with a black and white polydactylic dog. The Ciguapa also has a similar one-legged version from Colombia called La Patasolo, who shapeshifts into a skull horse head. Lovely. In at 4, El Sombreron. El Sombreron is a famous legend told in books and film, and is also a boogeyman figure throughout Spanish culture. The figure is known by other names like Cipitio, the Goblin, and Sissimite. However, his characteristics are always the same: a short man with a black dress, a thick belt, a large black hat, and boots that make a lot of noise when he walks. He is said to ride horses and braid their tails in manes. So sweet, I think. When he cannot find a horse, he will hunt down a dog to braid instead. Now the legend goes that in the neighborhood of La Recolosi lived a woman named Susanna, the daughter of a woman who owned a store. She was known to be pretty with long hair and blue hazelnut eyes. One night when there was a full moon, she was on her balcony admiring the sky when suddenly a short man appeared wearing a big hat and holding a guitar. The girl's beauty had amazed him. He sang her a song, however her parents quickly made her come inside. Since that day she had not been able to sleep because she still hears the man with the guitar. She has not been able to eat because when her food is served it is contaminated with soil. Her worried parents took the young girl to a priest in order to rid her of the entity. A few days later, El Sombreron disappeared for good. In at 3, Duende. Duende is a creature from Spanish folklore that has been conceptualized as a mischievous spirit inhabiting a house, often living inside the bedroom walls of young children. They are even known to clip the toenails of unkempt children, often leading to the mistaken removal of an entire toe. Yeah. No fun at all. Now, beliefs about duendes vary from region to region, but some say that they are the souls of infants who died before they could be baptized, whereas others simply portray them as naughty spirits that hide in a person's home and wreak havoc. Duendes became so legendary in Spain that in the 16th century there was even a law that said that anyone who moved into a home only to later realize it was infested with duendes were free to abandon it. Yeah. That's intense. No matter what, most stories about the duende seem to have a special relationship to children, most likely because parents used them as a tactic to scare their kids into doing things. Otherwise the duendes were coming to kidnap them or even eat them if you don't clean your room, eat your dinner, bathe, etc. Coming in at number 2, La Llorona. La Llorona, also known as the Weeping Woman or the Crier, is one of the most famous legends not just in Spanish culture but across the world. This lore states that a woman was abandoned by her husband and was left alone to raise her 2 children. The woman was devastated, so she drowned the boys in a river out of grief and rage. As a result, the woman was condemned to wander for all eternity until she finds the bodies of her children, often causing death and misfortune to those near her. Now, according to the legend, in a rural village lived a young woman named Maria. She came from a poor family but was known around her village for her beauty. One day a wealthy nobleman came to the village, who stopped in his tracks when he saw Maria. He proposed to her and she immediately accepted. The two wed and had 2 sons together. However, the husband was always travelling and when he came home he only paid attention to the children. And as time passed, Maria could tell he was falling out of love with her. She was right, because one day he returned to the village with a younger woman and bid his children farewell. Now this is when Maria drowned her 2 children in blind rage. However, once she realised what she had done, she searched the river for them, but they had already been swept away. Days later she was found dead on the riverbed, having committed the the two ultimate sins, murder and suicide. Her spirit now haunts the land of the living and the dead, weeping for her children, earning the name La Llorona. She kidnaps wandering children at night, mistaking them for her own, while begging the heavens for forgiveness, while drowning the children she kidnaps. Folks who have claimed to have seen her say she appears at night by rivers or lakes wearing a white or black gown with a veil, and others say that if you hear the cries of La Llorona, you are marked for death. Spooky. There was also a film, I watched it recently. It was utter trash, so hopefully the legend's creepier. Finally coming in at number 1, El Coco. The Coco, also known as the Cuco, Coca, or Cuca, is a mythical ghost monster equivalent to the boogeyman, found in Hispanophone and Lusophone countries. In Spain, Portugal, and Latin America, the legend goes that parents will often invoke the Coco, or Cuca, as a way of discouraging their children from misbehaving. They sing them lullabies or tell frightening rhymes which warn their children of El Coco. If they misbehave or don't obey, El Coco will come and get them, and then eat them. Classic. El Coco is a child eater and a kidnapper. It may devour the child immediately and leave no trace, or it may take the child away to a place of no return. However, it only does that to disobedient children. El Coco is known to lurk on rooftops, on the lookout for misbehaving children. It takes the shape of dark shadows and represents the opposite of a guardian angel, with the El Coco frequently compared to the devil. Now, one of the oldest known rhymes about the Coco originated from the 17th century and went like this, I quote, "Sleep child, sleep now, else Coco comes and will eat you." I mean, straight to the point really, I respect that. Now you could easily draw comparisons between El Coco and the boogeyman, however unlike the boogeyman, Latino parents use Coco to drive the fear of God into their children. Now another legend has it that El Coco is Francisco Ortega. At the beginning of the 20th century, Ortega was so desperate to find a cure for his tuberculosis that he visited a curandera. He was told to drink the blood of children, so he kidnapped a 7-year-old boy named Bernardo. However, I have my doubts about this considering the original Coco rhyme predates the Ortega legend. What do you guys think though? Coming in at 5, Arlington's Screaming Bridge. Now this Texas legend will quite honestly make your hair stand on end. Legend has it that one full night more than 50 years ago, several teens were carpooling home after their high school football game. Still riled up over the victory, driving responsibly definitely wasn't of utmost importance to the young teens. The bridge running through Arlington's River Legacy Park was just wide enough for one car at a time. You can probably guess where this is going. The teens hooting and hollering drowned out all the noise, like that of a vehicle that had no working headlights. The cars collided head-on before erupting in a fiery explosion and plunging into the waters below. Nobody survived. The bridge is now closed to vehicular traffic, with the site only accessed on foot. However, it now has a new name gifted to it by locals, Screaming Bridge, a name which was coined after the first brave souls went exploring along the bridge and experienced events that can only be explained by the supernatural. Legend has it, if you stand on the bridge and gaze into the river below, you'll see a tombstone for each of the deceased with their names, date of birth, and death. Visit at midnight on the anniversary and you'll hear two cars screeching towards each other before colliding. Coming in at 4, the nurse at Bexar County Hospital. If you ever find yourself in Texas, whatever you do not find yourself at the dilapidated Bexar County Hospital, because it is supposedly housing the spirit based on an American serial killer called Janine Jones. Now the real life killer is responsible for the deaths of up to 60 infants and children in her care as a licensed vocational nurse during the 1970s and 1980s. In 1994, she was convicted of murder and was sentenced to 99 years in prison with triple credit. Now, the legend of the nurse at Bexar County Hospital is similar treading, with legend stating that a murderous spirit used to wander the halls killing patients in order of their room number, first 201, then 202, 203, 204. It began in one ward where patients all began asking about one particular nurse. However, when the staff checked the security camera, they found the patients speaking to seemingly no one. They saw the curtains close on their own, tracheotomy tubes get pulled out by an unseen force, but then, very quickly, the patients began dying in their room number order. Like I said, many Bexar County locals believe the legend to be based off of Janine Jones, but what do you guys think? Coming in at 3, Summit Elementary School. In Amarillo, Texas, there's a haunting legend surrounding a closed and abandoned school that everyone avoids. The Summit Elementary School is one of the most haunted locations in in all of Texas, and its dark history makes it a hub for ghosts and spirits alike. The school was open up until 1972 and is haunted for numerous reasons, including a janitor who killed students and stuck them in the boiler, racially motivated murders that took place in the school, and murdered prostitutes hidden in the walls. These are just a few of the legends surrounding the terrifying building. Worse still, legend has it that if you're brave enough to visit the abandoned school at night, your car may do strange things. Swings will move by themselves and you might even hear voices coming from the walls. Honestly, this school is beginning to sound like the one from Marianne, which is a French horror series you all need to watch immediately. Do it. The Queen demands it. Coming in at 2, the Candy Lady. Now this very well might be one of the scariest urban legends I've ever read and may result in a lot of you sleeping with the light on tonight. Sorry in advance. This theory goes, I quote, "The Candy Lady allegedly lures children to their doom by leaving enticing goodies on their windowsills just before bedtime. Her plan is for the kids to wait for mum and dad to fall asleep before indulging in the sweet treats so as not to get in trouble. Afterwards, she'll grab them and feast on their sugar-laden blood until there isn't any left. Children began to go missing, yet no leads were ever found that would suggest they were kidnapped or ran away. As some of the remaining children got older, they confessed to eating candy left on their windowsills with a note from the Candy Lady, so parents started to wonder if the other children perhaps had been poisoned. The worry was soon put to rest when someone actually turned up dead. Not a child though, but a sheriff's deputy who had been investigating the disappearances. His eyes had been stabbed out with a fork, and his pockets stuffed with candy. A farmer also found a child-sized set of teeth inside a candy wrapper one morning while tending to his fields. Very creepy. The legend still remains in Texas, and whenever children go missing, people are very quick to blame the Candy Lady. And finally coming in at number 1, Black-Eyed Children. Black-Eyed Children or Black-Eyed Kids are a contemporary legend of supposed paranormal creatures that resemble children between the ages of 6 and 16 with pale skin and black eyes who are reportedly seen hitchhiking or are encountered on doorsteps of residential homes. Now, children are creepy already. They say strange things and their innocence allows them to breach the barrier between the living and the dead that we jaded adults just don't possess. However, the Black-Eyed Children legend is one for the history books and is downright terrifying. In the late 90s, a journalist named Brian Bethel was working in his town of Abilene, Texas, when he encountered something he'll never forget. He was parked outside a movie theater when 2 children knocked on his window. Brian couldn't quite understand why, but he was completely overcome with fear at the sight of them. He rolled down the window regardless, and the kids asked him for a ride back to their home so that they could get cash for the movie. His fear, however, made him hesitate, but the children were persistent. They then began to say some weird things, like, "We're not armed" or anything. Brian looked back at the kids and noticed how their eyes had turned pitch black. They then began screaming at him that they could only come in the car if he invited them in, so he quickly drove away. He spread the word about the Black-Eyed Children and was surprised when a lot of other people came forward reporting similar experiences. Coming in at number 5, we have the Werewolf of Defiance. During the summer of 1972, the people of Defiance claimed they were being terrorized by a werewolf. On July 25th, 1972, Ted Davis, a railroad worker, noticed something strange. He saw 2 hairy, huge paws on the ground in front of him. Confused and likely scared, he slowly raised his eyes and saw before him a creature at least 6 feet tall, hunched over and holding a large wooden board. Before Ted had a moment to react, he hit Ted on the shoulder and ran away. Just a few days after, Ted and his colleagues spotted the return of the unknown creature, and again in the next following day there was another report. A panic began to spur through the town and newspapers about the strange sightings. With all the sightings, it was agreed that the werewolf was large and humanoid. There were enough reports that the Defiance, Ohio Police Department had to open an investigation into werewolves in the area. It is even reported in the various newspapers in Ohio. Eventually, after days of looking with no result, the case was closed. Many people thought it was a prank, but during this experience, people were actually afraid that there were either a creature or some individual dressing up and attacking people. The sightings always happened at night, generally by the train tracks. A couple of women said it would try to get into their houses by rattling the doorknobs. The animal was said to be huge, hairy, and dressed in rags. In at number 4, we have Moonville Tunnel. Located in southern Ohio, these haunted tunnels were once used for multiple railroads. The abandoned coal mining town of Moonville near southeastern Ohio was founded in 1856. At its peak, the town was home to about 100 miners and their families. Little remains of the abandoned coal mining town of Moonville except for a few foundations, a nearby cemetery and an old railroad tunnel. Due to deterioration, the majority of the tunnels were abandoned, with some filled in for safety reasons. Now only a few remain open, one of which is famously known for being haunted. The railroads were the only route to Moonville, but throughout the years many people have died near the tunnel and train tracks. This is due to the fact that the tunnels were so narrow it was not possible for pedestrians to walk alongside the tracks in the tunnel while a train was passing through, which resulted in numerous fatalities. It is said that the Moonville tunnel is haunted by ghosts of locals who died from being struck by passing trains. Legend has it the ghost of a man who was killed instantly by a train passing through the tunnel wanders along the track bed near the old tunnel at night. One of the most famous deaths at the tunnel comes from a brakeman worker. Around 1859, a brakeman for the railway fell asleep, and sometime during the night he was awakened by the sound of his train leaving the depot. He arose, stumbling onto the train track and falling beneath the wheels of the train. The brakeman never recovered from his injuries, and the ghost of the man is said to be stumbling down the tracks within the tunnel with a lantern in hand, still trying to catch the train before it leaves Moonville station. This is why most who claim to have sighted the ghost of Moonville tunnel say that he carries a lantern and is sometimes seen as a hovering orb of light. In at number 3 we have Melonheads. Melonheads is the name given to the urban legend of human-like beings that live in the forests of Michigan, Connecticut, and Ohio. The Melonheads were originally abandoned children that a scientist by the name of Dr. Crow decided to take care of at his facility in Kirtland, Ohio. While the children stayed at the facility, Dr. Crow performed experiments. What got them the name Melonheads was when Dr. Crow injected chemicals into their brains, which caused their craniums to grow abnormally large. Because of the abnormal growth, they developed hydrocephalus, which caused them to become mentally ill. After years of neglect, the Melonheads ended Dr. Crow's life and burned down his facility. After the death of the mad scientist Dr. Crow, the Melonheads decided to inhabit the forests of Crybaby Bridge. To survive, the Melonheads feast on any animals that they hunted down. Because of their paranoia of society, the Melonheads ate anyone that spotted them. To keep the Melonheads cult going, they've kept inbreeding, making the offspring even more raving and paranoid. Legend holds that the Melonheads reside in Wisner Road in Kirtland and Chardon Township, with locals and bypassers reported seeing and hearing the Melonheads as they lurk in the forest looking for their next victim. Local lore depicts them as a territorial and angry, responsible for attacks, kidnappings, and theft of pets and livestock for food. An explorer even wrote a book about the first-person encounter with Melonhead. Kelly Topradosian claims that she was exploring the grounds of the then abandoned Felt Mansion and her friends one night when she saw a small human in the distance. They had an unusually large head, but she wasn't scared. Then he started walking towards them. In at number 2 we have Myrtle Hill Cemetery. Residing in Cleveland, Ohio, the Myrtle Hill Cemetery is one mysterious and scary resting place. This legend starts with a 3-foot round granite memorial that pays homage to a witch by the name of Stoskopf. Local legends explain that old lady Stoskopf murdered her family and tossed them in a well. When the townsfolk discovered the grisly truth, they sentenced her to death. When she was buried standing up, and a massive gravestone was placed above her to weigh her spirit down. Though that being said, the legend was likely inspired by the real-life slayings carried out by Martha Wise. Martha poisoned her family's water supply and ultimately killed 3 family members, only a mere mile away from where the witch's ball stands today. Early on, Wise claimed the devil made her do it, with the Plain Dealer reporting more than 125 witnesses were called to testify to Wise's insanity, stating that sometimes she barked like a dog and frothed at the mouth, that she wandered the woods at night and caught several barns on fire. Wise served most of the rest of her life in Marysville Reformatory, where she died at 89 in 1971. Although she's buried in Marysville, her victims are all buried within a couple of hundred feet of the Stoskopf spherical monument, which wasn't installed, according to local residents, until at least the early 1940s. Locals say that if you touch the stone at night and it's warm, it means that the witch has escaped and she's on the hunt for her next victim. Many can't help but believe that the cemetery itself is haunted, and out of curiosity, many people visit the cemetery and trespass at night to try to interact with its residents' spirits. And finally, in at number 1 we have Rogues Hollow. From the tales of a haunted mill and a Crybaby Bridge to a shaking graveyard and a headless horseman, Rogues Hollow is known to be one of Ohio's most haunted areas. You can explore the park today, just be sure to stay away after dark, as that's when the ghosts come out to play. Ohio Rogues Hollow Hollow was once a populated mining village, but very few remnants of the coal mining town remain now. The town was actually once a place notorious for outlaws and gangsters to hide out. Shootouts and robberies were common here, and these continued until the early 20th century. In spite of the town's crooked reality and a peculiar tale, creepy things continue to happen here. There have been multiple reports of sounds of a crying baby at night, shaking grounds at a graveyard, and ghost sightings that haunt the abandoned town. The abandoned mines around Rogues Hollow are full of ghosts of miners who perished there in cave-ins and accidents, with reports of tools being picked up by unseen hands in the black shafts chipping away at veins of coal. Though the entrance to the mine has been permanently blocked, and the walkway near the mine shafts are equally plagued by residents of the spirit world. One old legend that haunts the town is of the Chideston Mill ghost. The ghost was believed to belong to a mill worker who fell into the wheel and was crushed beneath the churning waves. The ghost guarded the area and is filled with jealousy and spite. Because of the negative energy this ghost brings, he supposedly started a fire in the Chidester house when an outsider expressed interest in purchasing it. A more modern legend is the Crybaby Bridge. At the bottom of the hollow, a bridge crosses Silver Creek. According to legend, a car traveling across the bridge slid on ice and plunged into the creek. Its occupants were no longer alive. Today, you can hear the cries being heard from the surrounding woods. There are an endless amount of ghost stories circulating about the old mining town of Rogues Hollow, with eyewitnesses reported seeing women in frontier dresses, hearing old trains, crying and floating tools, leaving us even more certain in the belief of ghosts and spirits.
Coming in at 5, rats in the toilet. Urban legends about animals in sewers have been rife throughout history, with the most notable being the alligators and crocodiles in the sewers of New York, which for the most part actually turned out to be true. However, the thought of finding something in your toilet inches away from vulnerable areas of your body, well, that's something nobody wants to think about. While the alligators and crocodiles are a far reach, this legend seems to have some elements of truth. A toilet drain is just wide enough for a rat to climb up, first and foremost, with the animals being attracted to sewage lines due to undigested food in feces. They follow the pipes and boom, wind up in your toilet bowl. Back in 1999, a woman in Virginia got a nasty fright when she went to the toilet and found a rat there waiting for her. Honestly, I've never feared a toilet before, but I certainly do now. Apparently this has happened enough times for public officials to put out a warning. If you encounter a rat in your toilet, close the lid and flush. Godspeed. Coming in at number 4, the Bunny Man. The Bunny Man is an urban legend that originated in Fairfax County, Virginia back in 1970. The legend has many variations, but for the most part involves a man wearing a rabbit costume who attacks people with an axe or hatchet. Most of the stories occur around Colchester Overpass, a southern railway overpass spanning Colchester Road near Clifton, Virginia, sometimes referred to as Bunny Man Bridge. In the tale, an escaped mental patient takes to gutting bunnies and hanging them from the bridge, but later escalated to the madman hanging teens in a similar manner. However, the legend is based out of reality. Following extensive research into the Bunny Man, the legend was linked to 2 cases of a man in rabbit costumes threatening people with an axe, with the vandalism reports occurring 10 days apart in 1970 in Burke, Virginia. The first incident occurred on the night of October 19, 1970 by US Air Force Academy cadet Robert Bennett and his fiancée, who were visiting relatives in Burke. While returning from a football game that evening, they reportedly parked their car in a field to visit an uncle who lived across the street. As they sat in the car, they noticed something moving outside the rear window. Moments later, the front passenger window smashed and there stood a figure in a bunny costume. As they drove away, the couple discovered a hatchet on the car floor. The second reported sighting occurred on the night of October 29, 1970, when construction security guard Paul Phillips approached a man standing on a porch of a home on Guinea Road. The man was wearing a white bunny costume and appeared to be around 20 years old. According to Paul, the man stated, I quote, "You are trespassing. If you come any closer, I'll chop off your head." Now, while neither incidents resulted in death or disembowelment, the thought of an adult in a bunny costume wielding a hatchet is absolutely terrifying. Coming in at number 3, we have Polybius. Polybius is an urban legend that emerged back in the early 2000s, with it concerning a supposedly fictitious arcade game called Polybius. The legend describes the game as part of a government-run crowdsourced psychology experiment which was based in Portland during 1981. According to the legend, the game apparently produced intense psychoactive and addictive effects in players, with the machines being said to have been periodically visited by men in black for the purpose of data mining the machines and analysing the effects. Now, while the entire legend doesn't quite hold up, there are some pieces that are actually based in fact. Brian Dunning, host of the Skeptoid podcast, did some digging and discovered that 12-year-old named Brian Mara had become sickened during a 28-hour marathon video game contest in Portland back in 1981. Just a few short days later, the Portland arcades were raided by federal agents who seized cabinets that were being used for gambling. Add these two events and add some fictitious elements and you have the legend of Polybius. Coming in at number 2, we have Candyman. The Candyman is an urban legend that tells the story of a murdered slave who returns from the dead in search of revenge if you say his name 5 times. In 1992, a Candyman movie was released based on the short story The Forbidden by Clive Barker. This in turn sparked 2 sequels, as well as a slew of paranormal games that friends dare each other to play. According to the urban legend, if you look into a mirror and chant the name Candyman 5 times, he will appear behind you and kill you with his hook. Now, although this is a legend and you will likely not invoke him by saying his name, there is some reality to the story. In the Candyman movie, after saying his name 5 times, Candyman breaks through the medicine cabinet in a bathroom in order to kill his victim. This part is factual, believe it or not. Back in 1987, the Chicago Reader published a story about Ruth McCoy, a woman living in a Chicago housing project who called 911 insisting she was being attacked. When responders arrived, they found her shot body, with investigators determining that her assailants had gained access to her unit by climbing through her medicine cabinet, which adjoins the apartments. The complex was supposedly built that way so that plumbers could attend to leaks by simply removing the cabinet to reach the pipes. However, this in turn resulted in people using this method to burgle and murder. Absolutely terrifying. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Cropsey. Once upon a time, Cropsey was a mere urban legend, the boogeyman of Staten Island in New York City. Cropsey was rumored to be a homicidal madman who had escaped from a mental institution and had a hook for a hand, who supposedly hunted children and dragged them back to the tunnel system under an abandoned hospital. Parents would often use Cropsey as a way to frighten their children into being good and staying close to home. The urban legend became so popular it inspired a 1981 slasher movie called The Burning, which very quickly became a cult classic. However, what was thought to be fiction quite quickly became reality. In the 1980s, Cropsey came to life in the form of a deranged killer who really did kidnap children. He was called Andre Rand. Rand was a janitor at the Willowbrook State School on Staten Island, which would eventually be closed in 1987 due to corporate punishment and rampant sexual abuse. In 1981, Holly Ann Hughes did not return home after going to the store to buy soap. Rand supposedly pulled up, pulling Holly into his car and driving away. Then again in 1983, 11-year-old Thais Jackson was reported missing after her mother had sent her to purchase food. She never returned. She was last seen exiting the Mariners Harbor Motel in Staten Island days after Rand had been released from prison. Then in 1987, Jennifer Schweiger was reported missing, and her body was later found underground after a 35-day search. Rand was ultimately convicted of the crime. A documentary about the madman was made entitled Cropsey, in which they speculate that Rand may have been involved with Satanism and provided the children to be sacrificed. Ultimately, Rand was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, with eligibility for parole in 2037, at which time he will be 93 years old.
Number 5. CIA PSYOP. One of the most nefarious urban legends about the elf on the shelf is that it is secretly tied to something much, much bigger than Santa Claus and the North Pole. The idea of the elf on the shelf is that you put it in your home, and every night the little guy zoops back to the North Pole and he tells Santa Claus about all your little one's behavior. Makes sense, right? Santa sees you while you're sleeping, but I guess that's not quite enough and he needs little helpers. So the elves are there to act as extra eyes and ears on the ground for Santa, who's a busy guy, I guess. They're called scout elves for this reason. Now, there has been some pushback from parents who argue that the elf on the shelf is conditioning young minds into blindly accepting surveillance at all times. Professor Laura Pinto of the University of Toronto, shout out, suggested this, saying that it communicates to developing minds that it's okay to be spied on at all times if it's for the greater good. In the children's book The Elf on a Shelf originates from, to some, this runs all the way to the top, with some conspiracists going so far as to say that the whole Elf on a Shelf storybook and little doll is a CIA operation to covertly steer the public consciousness of early brains towards normalizing a surveillance state, disguising themselves as a cheery Christmas toy company. This might sound utterly ridiculous, and it does sound utterly ridiculous. But first of all, Trust me, the CIA has done much stranger things than this. They've even been involved in psyops involving toy-making operations before. Now, whether or not the elf on a shelf is a government conspiracy is one thing, but you do have to admit it's a bit of a weird slant to the Santa angle. Santa watching good kids is one thing, but the elf on a shelf existing as a sort of living camera inside your home, training kids from an early age to always accept authority, always be okay with the idea that someone is watching, has larger implications, I would say. Just another bit of chintzy Christmas cheer? Or could it actually be something more sinister? Toss another log in the fire, get another cup of hot chocolate, because we've got all the best scary stories on the net and some of the best hosts. So just stay subscribed to Top 5 Scary and you won't miss a thing. Number 4, Haunted Elf. Now, I think part of us kind of suspects that maybe, just maybe, the elves on the shelves might be haunted. It's that grin, man. I don't know. I don't trust it. I think it's suspicious. And that's the newer, cleaned up elf on a shelf. Have you ever seen a picture of one of the vintage ones? Even scarier, but maybe that's just because I think the elf kind of looks like Hasbulla. A few years ago, this elf was put up on eBay because the owner was complaining that it was haunted. Makes perfect sense to me. If I had something in my home that had a malevolent spirit inside of it, I would definitely pack it in a crate and send it off for $20.99 plus shipping and handling. The owner of this elf texted her husband, "Haha, look at this. That elf is crazy. Time to pack him up because he's kinda creepy." Apparently after she warned her husband about it, that's when the troubles ramped up with the little holiday spy. It started fairly innocuous. The doorbell would ring on its own randomly during the day. That's easy to look past, right? Weird things happen. Well, one night the owner of the elf was feeling really sick. Too sick to move at all. So she slept on the living room couch instead of the bedroom, with the elf watching the entire night. She said that night she had horrible nightmares, dreaming of the elf cutting at her with tiny knives. Pretty downright horrifying, right? Well, when she woke up, she found the elf inside the cuff of the bottom of her pants, and somehow it gets worse. She continued on to say, "I was in the living room and I walked out and there was a hutch in the corner of the room with glass doors. I clearly saw a black human figure reflected in the glass, and then it moved sharply down the hallway. I ran to the hallway, but nothing was there. I checked in my kids' bedrooms, and they were both fast asleep. So I clearly saw that, and I have never had any experiences like this before." So to get rid of it, she put the elf on eBay to rid herself of the problem forever. But you want to know the truly scary part? The elf only sold for $30. Meaning potentially someone just cursed their home forever and the original owner barely even got enough for pizza out of it. Number 3, Little Footsteps. Our next story comes to us from Reddit. We love a good ghost story from Reddit around here, and this elf on a shelf is a pretty popular subject for a good amount of urban legends. There's something about him. I think we're all universally a little creeped out by this guy. Finally gave in. I got one of those stupid elf on the shelf dolls. I've never been one of those moms who do this kind of thing, especially something like the elf on a shelf. Just seemed like too much of a hassle for quick laughs, and it would end up being a mess for me to clean up later. But I got tired of hearing all those perfect moms in the PTA talk about their Pinterest-worthy elf on the shelf ideas. Oh, so cute, so clever. So how hard could it be? I figured I'd get one, and I'd switch it up every now and again, if only to shut my mother-in-law up for a couple weeks. So I did. I actually tried for a few days, and I was pretty proud of myself too. For a whole week, I set that little elf up in different mischievous places every night. I was really proud of myself. But perhaps I got a little too smug for my lazy self because, well, as per usual, after a week I got tired of extra work I had to do for my little guy. Was I ashamed that I gave up after a week? A little, but not enough to make me feel bad about putting the elf in the box in the attic. Somehow he got out of the box. I started seeing the elf in the shelf everywhere, except I wasn't the one placing him. And then I found the elf on a shelf with a knife and my kid's gerbil, dead. I found him by the oven when my casserole had been set for 500 degrees overnight while we slept, and the smoke had poured out and swamped the kitchen. That morning I poured my husband coffee as per usual. I went to go wake him up, and upon my return, I found that damn elf next to the bleach by the coffee mug. I don't know what to do. Maybe I'm just going crazy. Maybe the footsteps I keep hearing is my mind playing tricks on me. Or maybe, just maybe, it really is moving around. Number 2, elf on a nightmare. Now, not every parent likes the elf on a shelf. Some parents are deterred by it, thinking it's just another bit of Christmas consumerism, one more thing to buy. Of course, Some parents are also concerned because of the unintentional horror it can bring. This story comes to us from a blogger on a parenting blog describing what happened after she brought the elves into her home. She chose to get little tiny elves, saying that they were elf babies harvested fresh from an evergreen tree on a Thanksgiving day. Cute enough, right? Well, except the writer's kids were downright terrified of them. While they might have looked cute and festive during the daytime, when darkness falls and the shadows hit them just right, they'd be terrifying in the night, and I absolutely believe that. I mean, imagine being a little kid and seeing that thing watching you while you're sleeping. Her youngest son said that he would wake up in the middle of the night at 3 a.m. on multiple occasions and would swear up and down that the elf babies were standing on the end of his bed. Now, kids say the wildest things, but 3 a.m. does stand out a bit for me. That is the witching hour, after all. She tried to explain to her son that he had nightmares or night terrors and that, well, it's hard to understand what he saw isn't real. But he kept insisting that it was. However, the writer started to notice strange occurrences going on around their house that she just couldn't explain. She lost her car keys one day and found them in a place she'd said that she had never put them before in her life. She found doors unlocked that were locked when she left the house. Important documents going missing that she couldn't explain. She said one day her child took her by the hand and explained in a slow, exaggerated voice, unlike how he usually spoke, that the elves were behind all of these events. She goes on to say that she started to find the elves move from where she'd put them. She asked her son if he'd moved them at all, and he panicked, saying he had. The writer notes she was starting to worry that maybe her son was using the elves to play a trick on her, or that these elves truly did have some sinister power. Her son broke down in tears and begged her to lock him up. She did, and the next morning, the elves were in the bathroom sink instead of locked away in the filing cabinet she put them in the night before. So she decided to mail them away, far away to people in different states. What worries her is that one of them made it to the destination, but the Postal Service lost the second one, meaning wherever it was, it could still be out there, going to who knows where. So just be careful when you're ordering an elf on the shelf. And number 1, the elf came back. Our final story also comes to us from Reddit. The story begins with a Redditor talking about how he wanted to get an elf on the shelf with his girlfriend Stephanie for the holidays, as they'd been seeing each other for a while and he wanted to get festive for the season. He saw a boy carrying an elf in the shelf in a mason jar while at a restaurant, and apparently it was cute enough to inspire him to get his own. His girlfriend giggled when she saw it at the apartment, and it was sitting on the counter next to a fresh cup of coffee. The couple was having fun finding creative ways to set it up around the apartment, finding fun new ways to surprise each other. Together they named it Bonnie. One day, his girlfriend had come home and discovered that Bonnie was holding a piece of paper telling her to turn around. And when she did, the poster was there holding a wedding ring. She started crying and jumped on him, but unfortunately, the holiday cheer wouldn't last. After their proposal, their relationship started to suffer. She started to become more controlling, wouldn't let him see his friends, wouldn't let him talk to other women, wouldn't even let him call his mom. She started to judge his appearance and personality more. Eventually, the couple couldn't take it anymore, and the two split up and she moved out. The two had a violent argument and he was struck with a coffee mug. The next morning, he woke up and she had packed up everything and left, but had left Bonnie the elf. Later, her mother would contact him. He noted that he never liked her mother. She was involved in strange things like witchcraft. But she did say she was sorry to hear about the split, and was surprised to hear about it, and that Stephanie had told her everything. A couple months pass, and the OP notices Bonnie the elf moving around the apartment in different places. On a shelf, a couch, a fridge. Now, wanting to be reminded of the memories, he threw it away, only to discover that it was back in his apartment somehow. He called the police because he suspected that someone, possibly his ex-girlfriend, had broken into his apartment to stage a complicated prank. He asked the police to seize the elf, and they did, but not really understanding why. Weeks passed, and the OP had invited a new girl over for a date. She picked up Bonnie the elf and almost immediately began to bleed from her nose. OP ripped the dolls out of her hands and threw it at the wall, but as soon as he'd done that, the girl fell to the floor unconscious. He noticed that Bonnie the elf didn't look the same, and that Bonnie now looked like Stephanie, his ex-girlfriend.